Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to see you all here. Distinguished guests, Madam former President Vigdísar, Rector of the University of Iceland, Jón Atli, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Tawakkol Karman from Yemen, First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid, Mayor of Reykjavík, Dagur B. Eggertsson, and all you other distinguished guests and participants here today. And, of course, you, the audience, for showing up. Thank you all. We're very happy to see you here in Veröld, Vigdísar's house, an excellent building that makes a lot of noise when you open the door. Welcome to the Imagine Forum. This is something we've been working on now at Höfði Reykjavík Peace Center for a year. So we're very happy to see that you are all taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. We truly appreciate that. And we hope that we will be able to provide you with a lot of food for thought, a lot of speculations, and maybe motivation for what it is that you would like to contribute to a better world. We have a worthy task ahead of us here today, an ambitious plan to engage in a dialogue across not only nationalities and gender, but also across generations. We have invited a group of exceptional speakers to help us achieve this. So before I introduce all the distinguished speakers here today, we of course asked Madam Vigdísar to give us a few opening remarks as we embark on our journey here today. So without further ado, it is my great honor to invite former President of Iceland, Vigdísar to the podium.
Good morning, everybody, distinguished guests, dear friends. It's wonderful to see you in Iceland. I am delighted you who come from abroad. I am delighted to welcome you all from the foreign countries to Iceland and to welcome all of you here to our new building at the University of Iceland, which is dedicated to teaching and research of foreign languages. Its name is Veröld in our Nordic language, which is easy to understand in English as it cognates with the English word world. Veröld houses the Vigdís Institute of Foreign Languages and the Vigdís International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding, which is a UNESCO center. I am so very proud of the fact that we in Iceland have established a peace center, Höfði, named, as we all know, after the house where US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev met at their historic summit in Iceland in 1986. The Cold War between East and West had lasted for decades, and its most powerful symbol was the Berlin Wall. We Icelanders felt honored to host this meeting of the superpowers and hoped, of course, that an agreement would be signed here, making Iceland world famous. That wish was not fulfilled, and we were rather disappointed at the time, but before long we realized that the door had been pushed ajar. 3 years later, the Berlin Wall came down. East and West of Europe were reunited, thanks to the Reykjavik Summit. Here in Veröld, we are working for intercultural understanding, which is becoming ever more important in our increasing globalized world. Many of the major problems facing the international community, such as the increasing gap between rich and poor, gender inequality, and the imminent threat of global warming, will only be resolved through international cooperation, which requires respect for cultural literacy and linguistic diversity. These challenges are huge, and it is of paramount importance for us to engage in an open and inclusive dialogue on how to address them. That means that at all times we have to reach out to young people and hear what they have to say. They hold the future in their own hands. I'm happy to be able to say that the Höfði Peace Center and the Vigdísar International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding are working together to achieve these objectives, so that Reykjavík may be seen as a place where the cause of peace and accord is promoted through reasoned discourse and dialogue among individuals and nations. Let us all hope that this conference here in Reykjavík today will be a beacon that will light the path ahead for young people, to give them a clear voice on how they see this future. All voices must be heard in the debate on resolving the major challenges we face today. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to hearing the results of this innovative conference here in Veröld, and I wish you lively and fruitful deliberations in the interest of us all. Thank you.
Thank you for your inspiring words. We are so very grateful to be hosting, of course, this conference here in your house, Vigdís's house. Now I would like to briefly introduce to you all the speakers we have here today. I mentioned already our Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Ms. Tawakkol Karman. Let me also tell you about Mr. Uni Krishnan Karunakara, who is Assistant Professor of Public Health at Yale University and former international president of Doctors Without Borders, excuse me. That makes sense. Yes, exactly. Fallir farar heill. This is for the Icelanders. We also have with us Faten Madi Al-Hussaini. She's the co-founder of Just Unity and spokesperson against hate crime, and actually a TV presenter in Norway. We also have Deko. Where's Deko? Here she is. Deko Mohammed. She's Chief Executive Officer at Dr. Hawa Abdi Foundation in Somalia, a physician by trade. And she will tell us more about her story later on, as they all will, of course. Mack Wood, she is a poet and activist from Darfur. We will have a performance from her later in the afternoon, as well as a talk. And she's the recipient of the individual World Poetry Slam Award in 2015. Another one who has been awarded quite a distinguished prize is Achalek Christian Leke. He's a youth civil society activist and peace advocate from Cameroon, who was, I believe, mentioned as the Young Person of the Year in the Commonwealth in 2015. So as you can tell, we have a very distinguished group of speakers here today. We also have with us Elise Ferron, who is from the Tampere Peace Research Institute in Finland. We're very happy to have you here, Elise. And Georgina Campbell-Flatter, who is Executive Director of MIT Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. We also have quite a few Icelandic facilitators with us today, and to all of you, we are also, of course, extremely grateful. We have a representative of the police department in Reykjavík, Eirún Eyþórsdóttir. We have Ambassador Auðun Atlason, Acting Human Resources Director of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And we have Silja Bára Ómarsdóttir, of course, there she is. And she actually needs to be mentioned very particularly because she is the one who first got the idea that we should start this peace center. So I would like to acknowledge that as well. And I am probably forgetting someone, Ragna Sigurdardóttir, who is from the University of Iceland Student Council. She is also helping us here today. So that's what I'd like to say about the speakers for now. Also, just a little bit about the whole structure of the day. You also need to know, probably, a few of you, where the lavatories are. They're in this level. If you walk out here, and then all the way over there, and then on to the left. I think these are always useful bits of information to give out to an audience, because we are going to be spending a few hours here together. The first part of our program is taking part, as you can say, taking place here in this beautiful auditorium. We have 3 keynote addresses and then closing remarks from Mr. Guðlaugur Þór Þórðarson, who is Minister of Foreign Affairs. He could not be with us here right now, but he will be here soon. After lunch, we will have 3 different breakout sessions focusing on separate but nonetheless interlinked topics. I do believe I have the program up here so you can see what it looks like. And then we will convene here again in the afternoon after the breakout sessions. The breakout sessions are taking place in a few different locations here, so I'll give you more information about that after the lunch break. But then when we convene here at 3 o'clock, we will have a performance by Mack Wood. And then we will hear from all the breakout sessions to what conclusions they came, what findings they found in a session we call Young People, a Force for Peace, where we will have a summary of the main conclusions. And then at 4 o'clock, we are going to be introducing something new that we're doing, and we have Georgina to tell us about how to get from an idea to a project. And then finally, the mayor of Reykjavík, Dagur, will be telling us about our idea, which is called Startup Peace. And he will also offer us the closing remarks of the day. So as you can tell, it's going to be an interesting day, and we have a lot of things to do. But now, without further ado, it is my honor and pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Tawakkol Karman, a Yemeni journalist who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. And at the time, she was the youngest Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Tawakkol Karman has been called the mother of the revolution by Yemenis. She led protests for press freedom and actively fought for women's rights. She is the co-founder of the group Women Journalists Without Chains. Ms. Karman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. First of all, I am so happy to be here in Iceland. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. I will tell 2 funny stories. First, when I was in Amsterdam transit yesterday, and I was looking for the plane that will take me to Iceland, and in the screen I was looking for Kyiv, and it was Reykjavik, and where is my plane? So it was really, and it took for me 2 hours looking for my plane while it's in the screen. Second thing is my daughter, she's 14 years old. When she knows that I will come to Iceland, she told me, Mama, don't expect that you will go to a country that there is ice everywhere. You will find a very green country. So, and I saw that. So congratulations for your great country, and also I want to see ice as well. I'm so happy to be here in the most important country that protects press freedom. Congratulations for this international recognition that Iceland is the most important and the most highest country that protects press freedom. They told me that to talk about youth and their role in the development and peace. And when I say the address that looking over the horizon, I can assure you that the youth is the most important people that is looking over the horizon. And that always dream for making their horizon big and big and big. And the one who sacrifice to reach to their dream. I always believe in young people as power and creative energy with enough potential to make peace and bring about change. We have to stop dealing with them as immature, ones who are still lacking in wisdom, ability, and experience to take part in peace building to change. Hopes and aspiration for a bright future would only be achieved when we let young people be a crucial part of the future's equation. Success in achieving our desired future depends on empowering the youth to participate actively in conflict resolution and peacemaking, as well as to be vital part of process of change and development experienced and urgently needed by societies. As we mobilize young people and put them at the heart of the peacemaking equation, we must ensure that press and media platforms play also an effective role in promoting a culture of peace, coexistence, and acceptance of others, and raising people's awareness about hatred and violence. Society's political and intellectual elites, various media outlets, and human rights activists should not relent in spreading peace culture, nonviolence, love, coexistence, and anti-hatred, and fighting the culture of violence, fighting corruption, and fighting tyranny. The struggle for political reforms and the state of equal citizenship, justice, and good governance is one of the most important areas for peacemaking and leadership of change. Dear sisters and brothers, since the instability stems from oppression, injustice, and crackdown on right of freedoms, we can consider these human rights violations as form of war waged by corrupt and unjust regimes against the citizens, therefore leading a non-violent fight against such regimes is indeed a genuine part of the peacemaking process. I usually say peace doesn't mean just to stop war, but also to stop injustice and oppression. In many unstable countries, the youth account for the largest segment of the population, and it's a strategic mistake not to involve this broad group in achieving stability. As you know, this situation of instability leads to depriving young people of the opportunity for quality education and qualification required for active engagement in all fields, which in turn has a negative impact on the chances of building lasting peace process and makes all effort to achieve peace wasted. Dear sisters and brothers, real peace will not be achieved unless the youth are not. Real peace will not be achieved unless the youth are an essential part of it and the ultimate goal. Otherwise, such peace will be easily undermined. I'm calling youth everywhere. This is a message to them, especially here, the students. We are in the university. By the way, the students in Arab Spring, they are the one who carry the dreams of freedom. And they are the one who sacrifice for the freedom of our country, for democracy, for rule of law. So I'm here calling for every young people around the world. Be no more a tool of war. Be no more a tool of tyranny. Have your own dreams and moral commitment to make peace and move toward a future free from conflict, injustice, and corruption, to move toward democracy and development. Be confident in yourselves. Be confident that you can. You may say, or other people may say, especially with the countries that suffer from dictators and injustice, they will say the dictators, warlords, and commanders have the power and potential to oppress. What do we have, or what can youth do to stop them and take the initiative and write our own history as a youth, their own history as a young people? So I will answer this. To the youth, yes, you have something stronger than anything. You have the noble values. You have the dream. And nothing is stronger than dream. They have only oppression, nightmare. They have only nightmare and fear that people will wake up one day and cease from being mere victims of injustice and meaningless conflict. You have the ability to confront, and you have the courage to sacrifice. Face violence with non-violence, hate with love, conflict with coexistence and peace. Your voices are louder than the sounds of bullets, and your bare hands are stronger than guns and bombs. Dear everybody here, especially the formal, the officials people, nations became deprived of your creation when that youth disappeared of all levels of leadership. When the youth become seen as immature people who are lacking in wisdom, experience, and skill. This unfortunately happens in many parts of the world and all countries, but in different proportion, where leadership positions are assigned to the old people, while doors are closed in the face of the youth under different pretext and weak justification. So, to the youth again, especially the youth here, you need to have your own dream, as I said, and you need to have your own tools to achieve your dreams. You have to own your political parties or be active on your political parties, on different means of pressure, set up NGOs, overrun the media platforms, and be everywhere. This is your era. Seek to develop your potential, build capabilities, acquire communication skills, and be armed with knowledge, and believe in working miracles. You should be the leaders. If you want to save the world, if you want to serve your society, if you want to help people in achieving peace, on fighting corruption, on defending on human rights, be the leaders. The ones who make policies, implement programs and plans, and lead your country as well as you should be the leader of the world. So this is my advice, and to myself and to all the people who dream for making this world better. Finally, I want to say something about my own country, Yemen, who is suffering now from an ugly war. After a great peaceful revolution, the leadership in this peaceful resolution was with youth. My country, Yemen, now, after succeeding on topple the dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh, after he led counter-revolution against us, against our republic, against our dream to reach to the democracy and freedom and stability and rule of law, our country, Yemen, has been besieged or seized for 3 years. State employees have been unpaid for months, and people have no access to basic services such as water, electricity, health, and food. Simply put, Arab coalition, led by Emirates and Saudi, has broken its commitment towards the humanitarian situation in the country. Unfortunately, this coalition deals with this war just as a battle to fire bombs and throw missiles, ignoring consequences. People in Yemen have been caught between two counter-revolutions, two coups, between the militia of Al-Hussaini and Ali Saleh, the ousted president, dictator Ali Saleh, backed from Iran and also from the Arab coalition led by Saudi and Emirates. Yemen's capital and about 30% of its area have been occupied again by the Iranian that they backed coup consisted of the Houthi militia and forces loyal to the dictator Ali Saleh. On the opposite side, there is a Saudi-led military coalition occupying Aden and many of other southern provinces. This coalition is occupying my country. It keeps refusing to hand over these areas to the legitimate authority represented by the international recognized President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi and his government. In practice, this coalition led by Emirates and Saudi has expelled the president from Aden, the interim capital. It could be said that the president is now under house arrest in Riyadh because the coalition prevents him from returning to our temporary capital, Aden, and other provinces liberated from the coup and taken over by the coalition. Therefore, we are facing two coups again against the Yemeni legitimacy and against the Yemeni dream, against the Yemeni will to have a democratic country, to have a republic country, stable country that fighting corruption, that a democrat, and that committed to the rule of law. Finally, for creating and for achieving peace building, and this is what youth representing and sacrifice for and still working for, that we want again our country to be a democrat, and we will continue our struggle for achieving that, and we call for stopping this war, for immediate ceasefire, in parallel with the militia of Al-Houthi, the militia of the ousted President Ali Abdullah Saleh, and the other militias that is supported by the Emirates and Saudi. They have to hand over their weapons to the state. So the state should be the only body that owns the weapons. And then they have to transfer themselves to be political party. So then, at that time, they will be able to participate in the political life without using violence, without using weapons to achieve their goals. Then we should return to our draft of a constitution. This is one of the most important victory, most important outcomes that we made it after our peaceful revolution. This draft of constitution should go to the referendum. And then we organize the election. All this should be happen with the transitional justice that give the rights for the victims, that make all the procedures that guarantee that this crime and this war will not repeat again. And also, from other hand, Saudi and Emirates should leave our country now. They have to leave our country now. And they have to let our president to return to the free lands, to Aden, to rule my country, to implement his legitimacy. If they are really supported him as they claim, if they are really supported his legitimacy as they claim. Finally, people in my country, young people, youth, who raise the voice of justice, freedom, democracy, rule of law, equality, they are still there. Inside my country, Yemen, and outside my country. Inside Arab Spring countries, Egypt, Syria, Libya, and Tunis, carrying the dreams, knowing what is the horizon that they will reach, and absolutely, we will arrive to our destiny of freedom, democracy, peace, justice, equality, and rule of law. Thank you so much.
Well, it is not easy to be the one to speak after such a wonderful speech. Thank you for your very inspiring words. We are very happy and grateful to have you here with us. And now for our next speaker, Uni Krishnan Karunakara is an assistant professor of public health at Yale University and former international president of Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders. Mr. Karunakara has worked with the organization in very many countries, Ethiopia among them, Azerbaijan, Brazil, Bangladesh, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as holding various academic and research fellowships at universities around the globe. Mr. Karunakara, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So after such a rousing speech, it's a hard act to follow. I've been on a flight all night, so I might seem a bit sluggish. So my apologies. All right. So what I'm going to do is show you some pictures and basically talk about what I've done. I've been a humanitarian worker for about 2 decades. And humanitarian work and peace work don't always go together. And I'll try and explain why that is the case. But I'm going to touch upon a few things, and I hope there will be sort of areas of commonalities that we can discuss during the rest of the day. And I also have to admit I come here very pessimistic about the state of the world today. And that is, I've just come from Washington, D.C. I also come from India, where things are not all that great either. So all around, and I just spent a month in the Congo, in eastern Congo, where the fighting is starting again. So I am rather pessimistic, but I hope by the end of the day, with discussions with all of you, I will leave more optimistic than I am at the moment. Then one more thing. Some of the pictures might be disturbing, I apologize, but I think it's important to see some of those pictures. So you understand the context in which we work in many of the places. All right, so I'm going to talk about humanitarian action, maybe start with what it actually is, and then go on to some random ideas. They are connected, I can assure you, but it will all come together, hopefully, at the end of the presentation, but also perhaps at the end of the day. Okay, so what is humanitarian action? Humanitarian action is a moral activity grounded in an ethic of assistance to those in need. It's not a mandated activity. It's not something laid out by the United Nations. It's not a legally mandated work that we do, but it is a moral compulsion that we feel as, in the case of Médecins Sans Frontières, as doctors and nurses, to provide care for people who are in need of care. And normally, what we work with people who are affected by conflict. We work with people who've been affected by natural disasters. We work with people who are suffering from epidemics, but also people who've been neglected. Unfortunately, there are many countries in the world today that people are neglected by their own governments on the basis of their race, religion, etc. Right? And that is the reality today. But it's also important to realize humanitarian action is a very limited activity. It has to demonstrate an ethic of restraint. Now, it cannot be subordinated to political interests, military rationales, or even socially progressive moves towards peace or democracy. You can imagine we are perhaps one of the few non-governmental providers of healthcare in Yemen today, right? And in order to be able to work in Yemen, it's important that we don't get involved in the politics and focus on the needs of the people who have been affected by conflict. So we stay away from some of the discussions, some of the big political discussions, which you are the legitimate person to have those discussions around peace, but not doctors and nurses coming from America or Europe or, in my case, from India. Those discussions can only be had by citizens of that country. So humanitarian action is a very small, precise action, but it is a very important action. Humanitarian, the purpose is not to. Purpose is to work for people of Yemen today, not to work for people of Yemen tomorrow, if you understand what I mean. We are focused on immediate needs of life-saving needs of people, but not getting involved in discussions around, for example, rights of women in Afghanistan. While it is a very important discussion to be had, very often getting involved in those discussions will perhaps stop us or prevent us from addressing life-saving assistance at the moment. Now, this can be challenged. There are two different schools of humanitarian action. One is the Dunantist approach. I hope you know who Henri Dunant is. He was the founder of ICRC. And then, of course, the Wilsonian approach, which is a human rights-based approach. They're both very important, but in countries where there's open conflict going on, very often it's very difficult to work towards peace and democracy and provide life-saving humanitarian assistance at the same time. Now, this is also an important point to keep in mind, that very often humanitarian action happens in places where there is a clash of isms. Liberal democratic ideals sometimes collide with other visions of the world. Liberalism with socialism, liberalism with Islamism. There are very different ideas of different visions of how we should live. And very often these different visions collide in places where we work. So it is not for people coming from outside the country to impose a certain vision of life on the people in that country. Those it's the development is a contract between citizens and their government. Now, the government might not be responsive to the needs of people all the time, but it is still the job, it's still the right of citizens to engage in their political leaders and build the society that they want. Now, it may not conform with all of the universally accepted ideals that we've signed on to with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it is still, it's always a work in progress. And we can talk about what's going on in Europe at the moment, Spain, and what happened in Norway and Denmark and in other places during the migration crisis. So it's always a work in progress, but the citizens are the legitimate authorities to push for a social contract with their government. So, in short, what I want to say is humanitarian action is about saving lives and alleviating suffering. Right? It is not about alleviating poverty, which is the work that development workers usually do. They try and address root causes to problems. So, very important to understand what we are dealing with is almost always a result of immoral choices that have been made by leaders around the world. Right? We work in places where communities are not able to live in peace. We work in places where governments are not responsive to the needs of people. And we work in situations where the United Nations has failed to broker peace. We are talking about political failures at multiple levels. And Sadako Ogata, who was a United Nations High Commissioner, said very famously, there are no humanitarian solutions to humanitarian problems. It's when everything fails, that is when humanitarian action happens. So to look to humanitarian workers for solutions is perhaps the wrong thing to do. Because it's in the absence of solution, it's the very absence of solution that necessitates humanitarian actors. So humanitarian action is emblematic of failure. It occurs when the political has failed. But still, again, to reiterate, it's a necessary and essential civil society response to political failure. In Yemen and in Syria and in Myanmar today, it is important for people to know that there are other civil society, other citizens, other humans that stand in solidarity with them when they're going through a difficult time. They might not necessarily be able to bring solutions to problems, but the very fact that they stand in solidarity is a very important moral statement, but also a moral thing to do. Now, I'll just go over some of the principles of humanitarian action. And I think it is very important, especially when you do peace work. I know, Emmy, you're off to Darfur, and some of these principles might be interesting to consider. So the three very important principles of humanitarian action, one is impartiality. The principle that states that the only consideration for receiving assistance is need. And for a medical organization, that'll be medical need. It is very important to focus on the needs of people and not get involved in the politics of who is the good guy, who's the bad guy. Because very often in the fog of war, when there's conflict going on, it is very difficult to judge who is on the right side of history, who is on the wrong side of history. Right? Also, as doctors, you're not judges. You're not there to sit in judgment. You're there to meet health needs of people. So impartiality is a very, very important principle. The second, of course, is neutrality, and it follows the first principle of impartiality that I talked about. Very often, our ability to work in Afghanistan or our ability to work in Syria or in Yemen today depends on our neutrality. Only when warring parties are They understand that the only reason for us to be there is to meet the health needs of people and not to get involved in politics. Will they allow us the space to work there? Right? So neutrality is very important. And the third is, of course, independence. You're not there to do the bidding of other governments. Today, foreign assistance, international foreign assistance, is an extension of foreign policy for most countries. It's not an altruistic sort of assistance. It is the extension of foreign policy objectives. But the most important principle that we very rarely talk about is that of humanity. The belief that all people have the right to live a life of respect and dignity, regardless of their race, politics, religion. So that is what drives humanitarian workers to take risks, go to war zones, and to provide humanitarian assistance. Now, the important thing about humanity is that, as David Reef said, the deep radicalism of humanitarian action is the belief that people are not made to suffer. All major religions have suffering as part of their core belief. It's through suffering that you get to heaven. It's through suffering that you get redemption. But we reject that. People do not have to unnecessarily suffer. In India, there is the notion of fate, that this is your lot in life. And you just have to get through this life, and in your next life, things will be better. What that kind of belief, what that makes us do is to accept injustices. We kind of accept it because this is my fate for this life. In my next life, things will be better. We reject that, right? So that is a radical idea that people don't have to suffer unnecessarily. Now, if you, this is Michael Barnett, who in his book, A History of Humanitarianism, talks about the different phases of humanitarian action. And you can see very clearly, all through history, people who have tried to do good, but of course, things have gone horribly wrong. During the colonial era, it was the 3 C's, Christianity, civilization, and commerce. We know how all of that ended. Then, of course, during after the Second World War and the fall of the Soviet Union, development, sovereignty, decolonization, of course, a period of great adjustment, but also great conflict during that period. But then, of course, after the fall of the Soviet Union, as Francis Fukuyama said, end of history. We all drank the capitalism Kool-Aid. We all believe that that is the future, and of course, led to globalization. And we now know that that's not the answer as well. Even Fukuyama is now revising his end of history doctrine and thinking, what is the next new social contract that we should have? So we are now, and that's my addition, we are now in a period where global war on terror, it's not a traditional war. It's not always fought in battlefields. It's not, the theater of war is not carefully kind of demarcated. It happens everywhere. It happens at the airport in Brussels, it happens on the streets of Marseille, it happens in New York City, but it also happens in Syria, northern Iraq, and other parts of the world. So it's a different kind of war. But also, governments use this rubric of global war on terror to justify all sorts of injustices. The Patriot Act in the US, the current ban on travel from people from certain countries in the US, in India, Rohingya Muslims who are being kicked out is a polite term, but who are being, there's a massive ethnic cleansing going on in Myanmar, and again, it's all being done under stamping out terror. But what this has also done is we are now living in the age of security and securitization, right? And when you invoke security, even human rights takes an inferior role, which was not the case before 9/11. Countries were invaded because we invoked human rights and right to protect, etc., right? But now we are living in a very different world where security is the overriding concern. And when you talk about security, everything else is secondary, including human rights, right? So, liberté, égalité, fraternité, and of course, more importantly, security. Borders, just a few moments on borders. Borders are the most contentious sort of bits of real estate in the world today. This is where people are victimized, this is where people are criminalized, but this is also where incredible suffering, we see incredible suffering. And of course, more so, I mean, on the borders of Europe, right? We see borders have become very hostile environments. And some people have said that this is perhaps the displacement is perhaps the most important indicator of human insecurity today. Right? But how do we deal with borders? So these are some of the headlines. Send in the dogs, swarm on the streets. How borders also, what they do is they create a division between us and them. We otherize people. We stop seeing them as humans. They are swarms on the street. They are insects. They are locusts, right? Rescue boats use the gunships. Denmark goes to the extent of Geneva Convention. And now this is where the modern project, international projects starts to unravel. When I was working in the field in the 80s and the 90s, we would always, whenever there was a human rights issue, we would look to European nations to come in and claim the moral high ground and talk to governments about human rights, etc. Denmark, Norway. And these are the very governments that today, when we discuss the issue of migrants, slowly you start seeing a different color or a different sort of the whole veneer, I think, starts falling apart a little bit. So the commitment to human rights is being tested here severely, right? And this is so. All countries, for their membership in the United Nations, have signed on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And Article 14.1 very clearly states that everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum for persecution. Right? This is very clear. All countries have signed on to it. Right? What has Europe's response been? To externalize borders. Right? So now the border has been extended from Europe to first to Turkey and then to Libya. And this is deeply problematic. Now I have to point out this entire migrant issue, migration/refugee issue, is not just Europe's problem. It's a global problem. My country, India, has not taken in refugees. China hasn't taken in refugees. Arab countries could do much more. So it is not just Europe's problem. It's just happening, playing out on the borders of Europe. But I think the whole world has failed to address this problem in a decisive manner. And this is a very critical issue. And when we start talking about peace, this is one of the first things we start to address, not the migration issue, that we start we give other people their humanity back, that they are not swarms, they're not criminals, they're people trying to survive, they're people trying to seek safety. If you take the humanity away from them, then you can't even start talking about peace. That's one of the first things that we have to do. Now, I'm going to talk about a few challenges as I see it, and the last few slides. First is impunity. 2 years ago this month, in fact last week, our hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan was bombed by the United States Air Force, right? Now, that is just one incident. We have about 40 people who died in that hospital that day. But today, the reality is 4 out of 5 members of the Security Council today are members of coalitions that have bombed hospitals in Syria, in Yemen, and in other places. 4 out of 5 Security Council members. This is where peace is supposed to happen. Peace is supposed to be enforced in the Security Council, right? And when they themselves are not abiding by internationally accepted treaties, then who holds the stick? Who holds countries and governments accountable for human rights violations? There is no one today to do that. That's the reality. So there is impunity. Hospitals are bombed. Well, it's being normalized. Hospitals are being bombed in Yemen almost on a weekly basis, almost on a daily basis, right? So this was unacceptable. I mean, the Geneva Convention expressly forbids it, but there's no outrage today. It's accepted. So impunity. Second is indifference. Again, there is an epidemic of indifference. India today, as the Rohingya, ethnic cleansing was unfolding, the government of India decides to send back Rohingya refugees to Myanmar. How can you even justify that? How can we make sense of that? Right? Say indifference. And I use a medical term, there is an epidemic of indifference in the world today. We are concerned about our own welfare and not really about the welfare of others. And the third thing is institutionalization. This picture was taken at the World Humanitarian Summit that was held in Istanbul, May 2016, so less than 18 months ago, right? This humanitarian summit happened in the middle of the refugee crisis, the migrant crisis. Not a discussion about what was going on in Europe at that time, right? So we have created global institutions. The United Nations, for example, has become more of a debating chamber rather than a place where decisions are made and where peace is brokered and peace is enforced. In fact, UN has gotten so good at dealing with the symptoms rather than dealing with the root causes. So they're very good at responding to, well, even that is they're not good enough. But they respond to emergencies, they respond to humanitarian crises, they respond to all sorts of problems, but they are unable today to address the real problems that affect our very existence. So coming back to bringing it all back to peace, I like to keep so we have big objectives. We want world peace. We want peace in Palestine. We want peace in Syria. We want peace everywhere. I want to bring it back down to the human level. One of the first things that happen when ethnic cleansing happened is dehumanization. This is a poster from the Nazi propaganda times where the Jews were depicted as rodents to be killed. The moment we dehumanize, the moment we take humanity away from a person or a group of people, what happens is that then it becomes possible to do all sorts of injustices, even exterminate them, right? That's one of the first steps. So I think this is where a lot of the work as a humanitarian, what I would like to see done, and also young people, that we resist any language, and I think you will be talking about hate speech, etc., any language, any action that takes humanity away from people is something that we should resist, because that is the first step of long series of actions that might result in ethnic cleansing, genocide, and other kinds of massive, massive human rights violations. So dehumanization, and it's for me, it's one of the most meaningful things to engage. And so when people talk about building peace in Myanmar, my first thing is get the Rakhine Buddhists to give the humanity back to Rohingya Muslims. By doing that, they see them as fellow human beings, deserving of assistance, deserving of services, deserving of livelihood, etc. This is James Obinsky, my predecessor, who was also president of Médecins Sans Frontières, and he was the one who received MSF's Nobel Peace Prize in 1999. And in his address, he said this: "We're not sure that words can always save lives, but we know that silence can certainly kill." Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very enlightening presentation that you gave us, Dr. Karunakara. And now for our third keynote speaker, Faten Mahdi Al-Hussaini is an activist and spokesperson against hate crime in Norway. She founded the organization Just Unity in order to fight extremism and radicalization amongst young people in Norway. Recently, her messages have been carried on NRK, the Norwegian national television corporation, and I believe that she is by now a TV host for the Norwegian TV corporation. So I think we'll see a lot more of you, Faten. But now, please, the floor is yours.
I'm a tomboy, so I don't actually wear heels. We're done.
That's for you.
Thank you.
Sure.
First of all, I'm not politically correct, ever. And I won't be, ever. If I will be that, my voice wouldn't be heard. I am rude, I am bitchy, I am funny, I am blondie, I say dumb stuff, but that's what makes me the girl I am today. I'm not afraid of something. I'm not afraid of someone who will kill me. I'm afraid of spiders, clowns, and ghosts. I'm going to talk a little bit about my life. I came to Norway when I was 1.5 years old. My father, a political refugee from Iraq. When my father first came to Norway, he started to live on social services. 22 years after that, he still lived on social services. When my mom came to Norway, she had an education. She had a degree in economic and leadership. She haven't used it since then, since she came to Norway. They asked her to take 3 years of language, 3 years high school, and 6 years of university, 12 years. You would never do that. I would never do that. So she had just been sitting at home, giving birth to 5 more young girls, my sisters, and that's why I think all of us have an identity crisis at home, my sisters, because we don't know where we belong, because my mother and father doesn't understand us. I went to Iraq in 2005, lived there for a year. It wasn't the best year to choose to be there to learn Arabic. It was the US invasion. But I am dumb again, so I do stuff like that. And I stayed there for a year alone with my grandparents. I went to school. In Iraq, the school education and the education system is not like Norway. You get hit, you get tortured, and they don't like you if you're not from Iraq. You're from Europe, so why are you here? And it was the most important thing, the war. I survived that. It was the worst year of my life, but the best year also. I learned a lot. But when I came home, I hated all Muslims. I hated Muslims because I saw the brother killing each other's because the one is Sunni and the other is Shia. I hated Muslims because they were the one who kidnapped my friend. I hated Muslims so much. And then I started to learn about Islam when I was 14. And when I was 15 years old, I sat alone with my books, all alone by myself. No imam was beside me to talk to me about Islam, but I know I'd take that shit by myself. And then I started high school, the first day of my high school. The first question you will get is, hi, what is your name? Or you're beautiful, you flirt, I don't know what you do in university and stuff like that. But that's the first thing you ask for. They asked me, are you Sunni or Shia? What? Is that a question you ask people? They did. I answered, I'm a Shia Muslim. Okay, you should get killed. People like you is not Muslims. Fair enough. And then we have a lot of discussions in school about Shia and Sunni. This is the discussions we have in Norway in high schools and still have today. The hate I got because I'm a Shia Muslim made me hate them back. It made me radical. I hated every Sunni Muslim I knew. Even my family, from my mother's family, most of them are Sunni Muslim, but I hated them also. And I meant my dad and mom, who say Sunni and Shia are brothers, I hated them for that, because we're not. And then I went to Iraq in 2013. I walked to an imam and I told him, I need books. I need to prove them that we are right, they are wrong. Please, give me some books. He said, how old are you again? I'm 17, turning 18 soon. And you care about Sunni and Shia? Listen, honey, I'm from Iraq. We have been through Kuwait war, Iran war, Saddam Hussein, the US invasion, and now ISIS, and we still survive. There is still no Sunni and Shia. 2 minutes of that guy. Today, I'm not radical. I don't care about Sunni and Shia. I care about that we're humans, and that's it. And then my mom decided to take my 5 sisters to Iraq to learn them Arabic and stay with them for a year, the same school I went to. 2014, I get a call from my younger sister, and she said, you know, Fatin, ISIS is nearby our city. Can you please come to us? I'm the oldest one. My father is a faggot, so they always call me. I went to them. For the first time, I felt fear in Iraq. I felt people are afraid. I heard mothers scream because their son died, or the brothers, or the man, or their husband, I don't know. And we got back, and the first thing I see in Norway when I come back is a guy called Al-Hussaini, who's the leader of this extremist group in Norway. And he tells the Norwegian people on TV for 2 minutes that Islam is killing, Islam is cutting the head off, Islam is burning churches and mosques, Islam is raping girls, Islam is so much, Islam is everything else than the Islam I know. So I said, you know what, I'm going to start this demonstration against ISIS. Why not? Little girl, big dreams. And then I saw a guy who already had an event on Facebook. I contacted him. There was only 70 people who wanted to come. It got bigger, 3,000 now. We called every imam we had in Oslo. Please, can you be a part of this demonstration? No, I'm sick. No, I have to go. I have to travel. No, I can't. Sorry. Every Shia and Sunni imam said no. Every Sunni and Shia imam in Norway said no. Then we had the prime minister who said, I will be a part of this demonstration. Do you know who called me back? The imams. All of them. All of them was there. All of the hypocrites was there on the demonstration. I gave my speech. I told the Norwegian people, stop fucking judging us. I'm not the same Muslim as him. Get over it. After that day, I started Just Unity with the former extremist Yusuf as-Sadiq. We started Just Unity where we worked also face-to-face with the youth. And we had one case, we call it the human behind the monster. There is a guy from Norway who converted to Islam. He went to Syria, he got killed. And Yusuf called me 12 o'clock at night and tell me, you know what, we have to go to his mother and help her. It's really hard for her right now, and he died. We couldn't help him. And I said, fuck you. I don't care about this dude. He's fighting against my family in Iraq. He's fighting against my people in Iraq. Why do you think I have a little bit of sympathy with him? Why the hell do you think that? I won't go with you. And he said, you know what? You can be as mad as you want. Just come with me. Please, I need you there. I need you with the family. And they have girls, and you need to be there. I got there. And even when I talked to the mom, I was like, hi, Fatin. And I sat down. I didn't care. She cried. I didn't care. I was really heartless because he was a monster for me. And then she started to talk about him. She told me he was a nice guy. He had a lot of compassion. His biggest dream was to get the driver license. His mother and father is drug addicted. His father died when he was 8. His stepfather burned the house when he was inside with his mom. His sister is drug addicted. He never made it to school. He had ADHD. He had to change school because of that, because he's not good enough for them. And finally someone saw him, the extremist. This group of Muslims in Norway who call themselves Muslims saw him finally. Of course he will be a part of them. Of course when the society don't see boys like that. Of course, when we have prejudice and no, he's not good enough for me, he's not good enough for them, of course he will go and be a part. I will do that. And then suddenly I started to cry. And I looked at Yusuf and I told him, is it wrong that I'm crying for him? Is it wrong that I'm loving him so much? And I wished I really could help him. And he said, no, because he's not a monster, he's a human, but we made him a monster. That was my last case ever. I couldn't handle it. It was so hard for me. But I've been working with preventing extremism. I lived with police protection because extremists want me, and that's okay, who cares? But then I got other threats. You're not Muslim enough. You have too much makeup. You're showing your legs. You have attitude. You have boyfriends. You have gay friends. That was of my community. So the police protection was from my community. I got abused. What kind of abuse doesn't matter, but I got abused from a politician in Norway because I'm weak. Why I'm weak? Because I wear a hijab. So I moved for myself for a year because I was sick. I didn't want to tell my family. And for an Iraqi girl, you never move for yourself until you're married. I wasn't married, I just moved for myself. The threats got more, and we were talking about honor killing. They had to honor kill me. And then they were pressing my dad, who is a really great person, to be the monster he become. Because he got pressed from everywhere. People called him from the US. Hi, I saw an interview with your daughter, too much makeup. Are you kidding me? She's a shame for us Iraqis. Yeah, we're like that. We're talking about makeup. So my father had to force me into things I didn't want to 3 times, and I went out of it 3 times. And everyone in my community became a monster for me. I hated everyone. I hated the Iraqi community because they are monsters. After that year, I went back home because it was a lot of pressure on my father. Your girl should be killed or bring her back home because she cannot live for herself. If you live for yourself, you're a whore. I went back home, and today my father is not a monster. I'm trying to understand him. He had a lot of pressure on him. And then they asked me, the national TV, can you please be a TV host for us? And I said, yes. I will have a TV show about the election. The first article was about Fatin will have a TV program about the election. Do you care? Do you think any Norwegian guy in Norway cared about Fatin working for preventing extremism, living with danger, and giving so much away? is going to be a TV host? No. Fatin wears a hijab. And that's not okay. Before even the TV show started, we have 6,000 complaints. It never happened before. We had this guy here at 3,200, and they said, you will never get above him, ever. It's hilarious if it happened. Guess what? It happened. I made history again. But the thing is, in Norway, you're Norwegian if you talk about extremism. I was Norwegian then. I was Norwegian when I talked against my community. I was Norwegian when I talked for the women's rights. I was Norwegian when I told them I hate this community and I love the Norwegians, but I'm not Norwegian for wearing my hijab, and I will never be. They will never look at me as Norwegian, and I don't want them to look at me as Norwegian. I'm Norwegian and Iraqi, and I'm proud. My name in Norway is not Fatin anymore. My name in Norway is oppressed, forced, terrorist. My name in Norway is complained against. My name in Norway is so much more than just Fatin. And you know what? I don't care, because my name is Fatin, a hijabi, a Muslim, a Norwegian, an Iraqi, a strong, a dumb, young woman, and it will always be like that. And I don't care what they tell me. And in my program, I had to meet every party leader. And the one question I had for all of them was, am I Norwegian with my hijab? Everyone answered yes. But one. I asked her, am I Norwegian with my hijab? And she was like, I hear you speak Norwegian. Oh, really? Okay. Am I Norwegian with my hijab? It's your citizenship who decide that. Am I Norwegian with my hijab? Oh, stop talking about that. Am I Norwegian? I didn't ask so many times to get her approval of her because I don't care. I asked so many times because in my brain, I told myself, please, I know she misunderstood my question. She cannot tell me I'm Norwegian. She cannot tell a girl who sacrificed so much for her country, Norway, who lived under police protection, something she hasn't done. She's not Norwegian. And she did tell me all over again, no, you're not Norwegian. Maybe she didn't say directly no, but why can't you just answer me yes? In Norway, they love us when we talk against our community. They love us when I talk against the hijab. They will love me if I take off my hijab. They will love me if I be ex-Muslim. And many Europeans will do that. Why can't you love me as I am? Why is it so much hate? Somebody will say the 6,000 complaints you got wasn't against you, it was against the television channel. And you know what? Yeah, that's true. But the comments on Facebook, on everywhere, is only hate. It doesn't matter how many complaints we got. It doesn't matter what kind of comments people have. It's the attitude that is dangerous. The attitude against girls with hijab. In Norway, we're still back to something I call basic racism. We still talk about dark skin color. We still talk about wearing a hijab. Are you kidding with me? Are we done with that? They still doesn't believe I love Norway because I wear a hijab. I will always be the girl who support either Iran or Saudi Arabia. I will always be the girl who is actually from Iraq. And that's why you should, all of you, just speak out and tell them, no, you are Irish or I don't know, English or German or Swedish or Iraqi or Norwegian with your hijab and turban and with your hair and with your dark skin and I don't know what. But do you dare to be so non-political correct? That's the thing. Does our leaders, our politicians, dare to say, we're not so politically correct. You are who you are, and we respect you, and you're part of this country. It doesn't matter what religion you have, or skin color, or... They don't. A few of them actually dare, and they had paid the price. How many times do I have left? Okay, I'm done. Thank you. I don't know. Yeah.
Incredible words from Faten. Thank you so much. And now, to close our first session of the day, we have Mr. Guðlaugur Þór Þórðarson, who is the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Iceland, to bring everything together. Guðlaugur, here is the podium.
President of Iceland, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say first few things. Faten, I listen to a lot of speeches in my work, but this one was really inspiring, and your courage is an example for all of us. Just thank you. It's an honor to be invited to address you here today, to discuss youth, peace, and security. Although I may see myself as the same young person as I was when I graduated from this very university some years back, I do realize I no longer possess the authority to speak on behalf of the youth. But I speak on behalf of a small democracy, some would say young democracy. A country that possesses the energy and driving force of youth, which in my mind makes it as an agent of change and an agent for change. No matter how small or how large, we all bear the same responsibilities, to drive and to push for our full potential. We are judged by our actions, and by the same token, our inactions speaks volumes. Iceland, in spite of its size, has a platform and a voice. I see us as an agent for change, using our voice and our platform to share our experience and future goals, for others to learn from and to contribute to strengthen the resolve to build a better world. This is what I want to touch upon today, and by doing so, I want to focus on three distinct areas. Firstly, peace, second, human rights and gender equality, and lastly, economic freedom. First, let me discuss briefly peace, stability, and universal respect for one another. Peace is a multi-layered fabric. It is rich in color, and it's only as strong as the efforts that are put into weaving it. If we want this fabric to last in the turbulent winds of world politics, it needs broad ownership from various segments of society: academia, civil society, media, and not least citizens, no matter what their opinions or way of life may be. In a world of constant struggle between different interests, a world where inequality and conflict is a sad fact of too many lives, it is essential that we do not lose sight of the values which we have built our societies on. Respect for diversity, human rights, and individual freedoms. Representing charity, harmony, and reverence. Good governance requires sound laws based on and protecting human rights. Rights without the machinery to enforce them have very little value. Laws that are not grounded in human rights will never, in the long run, enjoy the support of the people. Laws divorced from human rights are more likely to foster injustice and derailing societies from within. Poor governance threatens peace and security within a country, and it destabilizes whole regions. So while we bear a responsibility to our own people to govern well, we also bear a responsibility to the global community. Each nation is sovereign indeed, but none of us is isolated from the world and world events. I think all of us agree on that inclusion is key in this respect. But this begs the question, how do we assure that international efforts to build peace are both meaningful and lasting? This is a complex question, and there are no short answers. This leads me to the next point. To build lasting peace and stability, we need to guarantee respect for basic human rights, and more specifically, I want to specifically mention the need to ensure gender equality. This is an area where Iceland can contribute greatly to the world. Iceland has been lucky enough to be free of conflicts. That, however, does not mean we do not have a role to play in advancing peace and common prosperity. We do that in part by remaining a voice for gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. The challenge is not only to maintain the strong emphasis that we and our Nordic friends place on gender, but rather to push for new and innovative ways to support and further advance the work that is already underway. Equality is an essential part of sustainable development, clean economic growth, social justice, sustainable peace, and security. Only through equality can a society in general be deemed successful. This brings me to my third and final point. To realize the full potential of both individuals and societies at large, we need freedom. Freedom to act and freedom to grow. Only a century ago, Iceland was the poorest nation of Western Europe. Today, we are among the wealthiest and most forward-looking nations on the planet. The key to this success is very simple: trade. Nature has given us riches, and we have been fortunate enough to be able to trade in a free and fair way and taking care not to upset our delicate balance with nature. This brings me back to my initial points. If the very essence of freedom is questioned by those who make up the complex fabric of societies, it will only hit them back with a cold storm. And it will hit those in our societies that needs growth and prosperity the most. And let's keep in mind that free trade is not only the exchange of goods or services for money for the benefits of both parties. Free trade is forming relationship. Free trade is people interacting, traveling, understanding each other regardless of race or religion. Free trade is therefore one of the most powerful tools to establish and maintaining peace. Dear guests, Iceland, with its platform and its voice, will continue to champion freedom. These are the values that make our communities sought after and a model. They are the fabric of a better, safer world. I hope our discussion here today will only strengthen our resolve to honor these values. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the first session, and a well-deserved lunch is just behind the wall. But before I let you go, let me just go over a few of the practical things for the breakout sessions in the afternoon. We begin again at 1 o'clock, and the breakout session that we're calling Current Challenges will begin its work here in the auditorium at 1 p.m. It will then split into group discussions in 2 rooms on the next level, and they are room 103 and 104. And that will not be until after the opening remarks by Deko Mohammed, who will be here. The second session on empowering young people will take place in the hall opposite the auditorium, number 008, just across the hall here. And the third one, on radicalization and extremism, will be in room, okay, I got it wrong. I think it was supposed to be 007 and then 008. I'm sorry about that, but we should be able to find it. It's right next to each other here across the hall. And the 2 speakers there will be Atchaleke Christian Leke and Elise Ferron. To all you, our wonderful speakers and guests this morning, thank you so much for being here with us. Let's go and have lunch.
Welcome to this breakout session. This is the breakout session on current challenges. So the way we'll organize this is first we'll have an open lecture from Deko Mohammed for 15-20 minutes. She is the Chief Executive Officer at Dr. Hava Abdi Foundation, and she will give a lecture on youth empowerment and education as essential tools for peacemaking. After Deko's talk, we'll have a short reaction from each of the discussants, just 2 to 3 minutes, and after their reactions, we'll move into a couple of classrooms that are upstairs, and there we'll sit in groups and discuss things further. So I want to introduce the discussants as well. We have Uni Krishnan Karanukara, which we heard from this morning, Assistant Professor of Public Health at Yale University and former International President of Medicines or Doctors Without Borders. Then we have Emi Mahmoud, poet and activist. She is a UNHCR high-profile supporter and one of BBC's 100 most inspirational women of 2015. She is Sudanese American as well. Then we have Silja Bára Ómarsdóttir, adjunct lecturer in international relations at the University of Iceland. And then we were fortunate to get as well Gunnhild Hugensen-Gjörv, who is not on the slide, but is with us here today. She is Professor of Critical Peace and Conflict Studies at the Center for Peace Studies at the University of Tromsø. But without further ado, I want to introduce Deko to the podium.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for getting to the podium slowly since I broke my leg 16 weeks ago, but it didn't stop me to travel and enjoy your beautiful country. I got introduced to Iceland through my friend who's sitting here, Hun. We were together in Yale World Fellow program last year, and the moment I saw her soft-spoken and calmness, I've not seen your country, I fall in love. So it's very important how to present your country and your love. Mostly I'm going to share my life and the work I do and the challenges I faced since I'm born the country I haven't chosen. So to be in a country, it's not our choice. We're born into it. First time, Somalia in the war. I'm from Somalia, East Africa, and we are in the war over 26 years now, almost over a quarter century. And first time I have seen a gun, I was 13 years old. It's not in a movie, it's for real. I'm born in both parents who were middle class, very educated, working hard, and we hardly had a lunch together, because my both parents are working every day. My mom she's a doctor, and on top of that, she decided to become a lawyer. So she had 2 double degrees, and my father was hardworking automobile mechanic, and he was dealing with the government issues of transportation. So one day we had a lunch, one of few rare days, and sitting in a table after 15, 20 minutes, having a chat, enjoying our beautiful lunch, someone broke the door, slammed it. And my father, having background in military, he's the one who jumped first. And he said, "What's going on?" And when we looked all into the door, there was a 3-man with the AK-47. I didn't know that time there was an AK-47. In 1988, I was 13. And the moment they enter, it seems like surreal. It's like a movie. But my father screamed and yelled, and he said, "I have never seen," the way he screamed, which is unbelievable, he said, "Not in front of the children." He knew they will take him, or maybe they will kill him, but he refused to be in front of us. He screamed so hard that I had to hold my ears. So that horrifying moment where my father was taken, and my mom just looked at me and said, "Deko, look after your younger siblings. I want to know where they took him." So that moment, being 13, I felt I'm 60 years old. Because the responsibility and the pressure that when you're in a war zone, it takes you, and how quickly you grow, and how quickly you take a position of a grown-up person. So my mind was going, what I'm going to do, where I should take them, how I'm going to feed them, how if they don't come back, what's going to happen. But I was fortunate, that day my father was not killed, but many, many other young people like me, their father was taken and killed in my country. And the first day I have seen in human intestine, I'm a physician. It's not the day I went to anatomy in Russia. It was right when the war started, 1991, in Somalia. A young girl who was about to rape, and she refused, and she said, "I want to die instead of getting raped." And they kill her. And she came to our hospital, and first time I was 15. My job was in a hospital to identify how severe wounds are. If they need the surgery, or it's a minor injury, so I can identify and send. That was my job at the age of 15. Seeing human intestine, and I deliver a child. It's not when I become an obstetrician in 2003. I delivered a child when I was 15 because I had to watch a mother who's giving a birth, but we didn't have enough medical staff, so I had to take. And now he's grown up, and he's making me look old when I say I was his midwife because he is a 26 years old man, married, and he just had a baby. So I follow up with him, and he's in our village. With all those horrifying things going on in Somalia, my mom refused to leave the country. And she refused to complain and not to do anything. She stood up, she welcomed everyone, her patient, her friends, and she tried to build a state where there's no state and government. So she sheltered them. Finally, we joke and we say, "Mom, you never had opportunity to practice law, but you got now a state, now you're practicing." So she created laws, she implemented. They work hard with my father and her, and I was lucky my parents understood the importance of education. So they didn't kept me stay longer. In 1992, I left the country. I went to Russia and get education through Kenya and Uganda. So I was very, very few 17 years old who could have opportunity to go continue their education. One of those days when I was in universities, my classmates were interested to see practice, were trying to learn what medicine means, the side effects. To me, I felt it was reverse. I will see the wound, and I remember what I have seen, and I say, oh, I got it now. That is why that patient died, because I was not a doctor. So, and every one of my classmates will look at me, what are you talking about? No, we had exactly those kind of patient wound, but I didn't know the reason he died. So to me, medicine was more interesting, more discovering what I have seen, and more putting dots into the places. I finished my medical school. Before I finished in 1997, I went back a summer to help my family and my mom and the people in Somalia. And we had it was the same I left. I felt like deja vu, the war, the wound, and everything was going on. And one day we were so exhausted, worked hard, treated the wounded. At least I know anatomy this time. I felt like I'm the best doctor in the hospital, being third year of medical student. And being exhausted that day, I went outside of the hospital and I saw a couple of young militia guys. That time we didn't have extremists in Somalia. And I couldn't hold myself. I went to them and I yelled at them and said, you're the same clan, you're a very powerful clan, you're destroying everything. Why not to take the country? Why not to make it peaceful? You know, why you become a president, prime minister, we don't care. One clan, we just want to have a peace. And he looked at me. On that moment, I couldn't understood why he answered back. Why was that? What he was talking about. I didn't get his answer, but now when I look back, I understand where he was coming from. He looked at me and he said, what kind of beast you talking about? We have one. You know, I have a gun. I have a money. I have a house. You know, I have a life. And I said, this is the life you want? And I walked away. I was so mad. But when I study where they come from, who they are, the knowledge helped me. Those boys or those clans, they never seen a peace. They're born in an environment where it was very harsh, all their life where they're fighting with the government. They didn't have enough guns. They didn't have home. They didn't have anything. They hardly eat it. And now they come to the city. They destroy the government. They have housing. They loot it. They're eating. To them, this feels good. In their mind, concept of peace, I have it already. So on that day when I understood their life, I got it. The concept of peace has to be redefined. Who's talking about the peace? What kind of peace? Did the young people understood what peace meant? You cannot ask a person what he never seen. If you tell me the Iceland, you know, I have never seen, and you try to tell me more as much as possible, I have never seen. I cannot define how it looks like. So our young people who are in Somalia today, who are become extremists, I think we did it. We have to take a responsibility part of that because we never educate them. We never take time to talk to them what peace is supposed to mean. So this village my mom built, one of my biggest role is not as a physician, it's as an educator. I started school in 2008. Next year will be 10 years. And my biggest mission is to educate. Just having that conversation in 1997. How I can educate the young people. How I can tell the stories, the places I have seen, what peace is supposed to mean, you know, how we can educate them without, let's have a conversation, let's have a talk without having a fight. So that's my biggest role. And I was luckily 2 years ago met a friend of mine in Yale, and we are working with Yale University, a human rights program. To me, human rights, we have to teach the kids as young as possible. It's not because when they reach the university or maybe beautiful UN meetings or maybe just being a human rights watch, we need to have human rights action. We need to teach our kids what is right, what is wrong, the respect, we have to, how we can work together, how we can collaborate together. This world belongs to us all together. No matter how we ignore it, We say their problem, it get to you. It will get to you. We cannot ignore it anymore. We cannot say that's their problem, this is my problem. The problem is ours, and our world is ours. And humanity, we are all human beings. Believe me, if you touch your heart, we all have same heart and same heartbeat. Maybe we're different outside. Maybe you have different color, different clothes, different eyes, which is beautiful to me. Humanity, to me, it's a garden with beautiful different roses. I don't see color and I don't react, but I see a beautiful rose. So how we can reach that moment where we respect and work together, I think it's only through education. It's only through education and through empowering the youth. Because this, as being today's people, the world belongs to the young people. And we have to train them, we have to mentor them, we have to nourish them. We have to teach them what's right and what's wrong. That's our goal and that's our responsibility. It's not criticizing. It's not finger pointing. It's not blaming each other. It's working together. We cannot talk peace and sit aside. Peace, it needs to be worked very, very hard. We work very hard in our village every single day. We communicate our community, we implement laws, we try to solve issues, we try to stop domestic violence, which we are trying every single day. It's not like I'm done, there is a rule, there is a law, I don't care. No, we have to work hard. Peace needs to be working hard and needs to be defined, redefined, and understood much deeper and educate and get it deeply understanding. This morning's lecture really inspired me and put me in emotion. And Dr. Uni's lecture, thank you. As a physician, I will thank you, and as a former MSF employee, that was the 2 years I worked at MSF was the best years as a practitioner fulfilling for me. And as a young girl, Feta gave the lecture last, she didn't deserve what she went through. She did not. We put it to her that. We destroyed her country, and her second adopted country, we put her into the hell. So that is our fault, and we have to take the responsibility. We have to stop being prejudiced. We have to stop being, it's only about me. We need to think about us. Otherwise, it will get to you. I want to end my conversation before I get so emotionally. But I want to end with one quote I found somewhere. It says, "The world is a complicated place. And it might be if we all try to listen instead of picking teams and bickering, we might be able to fix some shit we created." So thank you.
Thank you, Deko, for these extremely powerful words. Now I want to ask the discussants to come up here and have a seat. And we want to give you a chance to react or respond to Deko's talk. If I could invite you to start, Demi.
So first of all, it's really hard to speak right now because everything that you said really spoke to my experience both as somebody from Sudan and Darfur and also someone who's from the U.S. and who also a Yale, but went through I'm still so emotional. But I think the thing that was incredible about what you said is that it's very empowering because there is something that we do in a lot of the professional circles where we let cultural stereotypes about youth and about young people inform our decision-making skills. And even if you look at the way they talk about teenage brain or the young people's decision-making, oh, they're young, so they're crazy, and stuff like that. But if you think about the stuff that you did when you were 15, 13, all of that kind of responsibility, the kind of humanity and initiative that it takes, youth are very wholly capable of that. And I'm wondering if we have to live in a world where we have to wait until we're at the breaking point to give youth that kind of power, or if we can be able to give that kind of responsibility and that kind of mentoring in a place where there isn't really a problem, or where we haven't reached, you know, the point of breaking. I'm wondering, when everything is okay, can we still see teenagers or young people as young people, or can we give them the kind of responsibility that will prepare them to move toward a better world? So thank you for everything that you did and everything that you said, and I'm like about to cry, so I'm gonna stop talking.
Thank you. Uni?
I'm going to start from where you left off. I don't think it is for us to give youth the power. It is for them to take it. I don't believe in empowering women, empowering youth, because I don't think it is our power to give. It is their power to take. So I think we have to flip this conversation a little bit, and I think people have to claim this political space for political discussion, etc. Right? That's one. Your story about Somalia, it's quite remarkable. There are several countries in the world today where we seem to go around in circles. Somalia, Congo, South Sudan. I think the situation has been quite bad for a long time, and especially with regards to Somalia and also Congo. We have several layers of conflict. At any given point, it is not always clear what conflict are we addressing. Now the problem is, as long as we don't address the fundamental issues that create these conflicts, I think we will continue to tread water, right? We will go through the motions of peace building, etc., but the root cause remains unaddressed. So going back to what the minister said earlier, one thing that I would take issue with, free trade, for example. I think there's no such thing as free trade. Even the biggest proponent of free trade in the world today, the United States, has certain sectors of its industry are protected. At the heart of the free trade is a very protectionist tendency, intellectual property, which gives monopolies for 20 years to pharmaceutical companies and other industries, right? So there's no such thing as free trade. And I think, again, one more thing, there's no north and south anymore. It's the division is between the rich and the poor. I think we were talking about it earlier. So the rich in India have much more in common with the rich in the United States and in Europe than poor people in their own country. So we have a social contract, a global social contract that is increasing the inequality that exists. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And as long as we don't address it, we will continue to have problems. We will continue to have people who want to leave their homes looking for places where they can bring up their children in peace and security. In peace and security. And I've been to many such discussions, we are so unwilling to address the paradigm, the social contract that we all seem to have sort of don't want to question. I think that is very important that this be addressed. And young people, I think today, they're the ones who can vision a new world for themselves. And I think it has to start with the basics.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for a very inspiring introduction, Tawakkol. I want to pick up a little bit on where Uni was going with the free trade and add borders to that discussion, also building on what you were talking about this morning. The idea that free trade can build peace may work for a region like the European Union, where you have the economic integration and so on. But if you are confining people within borders that are man-made and you're not respecting their human rights on the basis of people's humanity, but on the basis of their citizenship, I think you have a problem. And I think the changes, I don't know, maybe it's a nitpicky concept, but I think we do need to empower both women, young people, marginal groups, in the sense that we need some people, mostly men, mostly white people, to surrender their power and start listening to young people, for example. We have studies here in Iceland, and we're, of course, extremely privileged when it comes to our economic situation, our the level of pacifism and individual freedoms that we have in this country. But we hear young people talking about that they feel a threat from climate change. And that's not a threat that is apparent in the actions of the government. So it's also starting to listen to the real and perceived fears that young people all around the world have, whether they are facing wartime or longer-term potential changes. And I think that in that sense, it's our responsibility to surrender some of our power and empower young people through passing, through listening and through passing some power to them. And I want to again, something you mentioned, Doni, this morning was that we now have 4 out of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council who have participated in or have bombed hospitals and are not respecting the rules that we as humanity have set for ourselves. Is, maybe we need to start looking at projects like Your Village, that we need to emphasize the, and I'm usually a person who thinks in structural solutions, but that we need to emphasize the opportunities for individuals to make change. And, that even though we can't save everybody, that's often something we hear here is in the political discourse is, oh, we can't make any significant changes in the situation for, the refugees, as if that's a universal group. So that should be an excuse not to accept a refugee or an asylum seeker, that we need to help the individual and also help the individuals who are making changes in their immediate environment. Thank you.
We have to steal Emily away because she needs to sorry about that. Please go ahead.
Well, I was going to follow up on...
It is for us to claim it, but the space for us to take space doesn't exist.
She will be back. She will be back.
I was going to say I wanted to follow on something that Emmy said about the emotion she felt when you were speaking. And although I literally just dropped in here from a couple of planes coming from North Norway, and so I missed the morning session, and I regret that because I already hear how good the sessions are. But at the same time, I have the benefit that I have not had the time to think. And so I also reacted very emotionally to your talk, and not really expecting to. I started to think about my dad. And my dad was a teenager during World War II. And he was a Dutch boy, and when he turned 18, he got sent to Germany for forced labor. And while he was there and was getting towards the end of the war at that time, he was witness to the liberation of Germany by Russian soldiers and witnessed rape of women. And that impacts him so much still today. My father is now 92 years old and still trucking along and such, but World War II, that's everything. It's just everything that he thinks about. And so thinking about power, again, what we're talking about here, I'm thinking about the power inside youth. Young people will experience these things in ways that when we get older, we're experiencing it more differently. And they are perhaps dramatically experiencing these things in ways that perhaps as older persons we don't totally understand. And that touches also on what you said, how young people in your community who become extremist, and we see young people in a lot of communities being extremist, be it right-wing extremism. I mean, a lot of young people are, you know, it's not a part of the past. And Islamic extremism and various elements of extremism, which makes me think that we can't underestimate the power that is with youth, but also the power conflict has on youth and how they experience it and how they take it through life, because actually what they're experiencing as young people is going to impact how they act throughout their lives. So while they are being empowered or taking their power, they need a lot of support, and exactly what you're saying, them being the educator and being there to sort of like facilitate their feelings and their thoughts. Because see, like my own father, he never had that, and he won't leave it alone. And I think that, then it goes into me, you know, they say how trauma goes through generations. I did not experience World War II in the Netherlands, but I've experienced it through him. And I know I'm very impacted by how he has expressed himself. So I really appreciate your contribution from very much the emotional side, but also the importance that of our role as, you know, now I'm 50, you know, I'm old-ish, and how much it's so important for us to support young people. Also those who are looking to extremes and thinking that they could find answers there, because they'll take this much farther than we could ever imagine. So we really need to respect the power of youth. So thank you very much for your talk.
Yes, thank you all for these excellent comments. I think this leaves us with a lot of food for thought for further discussions. So now I want to invite you to join us into the 2 classrooms upstairs, where we'll sit around tables and discuss further in groups. I will lead the way.
Sorry, this is the light. This is the way the light is supposed to be. So we will stick with that. Good to see you all back here. I hope you had some wonderful discussions, of which we will hear more in just a short while. But before that, we are very happy to have with us Mack Wood. She has been awarded the World Slam Poetry Award. She is also a BBC 100 Most Inspirational Women. She is an activist and a poet from Darfur. She is also a UNHCR high-profile supporter. I could continue telling her praises, but I would actually like her to come to the podium and talk instead of me ranting about her. So Emmy, please, the podium is yours.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm gonna actually try to get rid of this podium. I hope I don't get in trouble. Okay, cool. Can you all see me? Is this okay? So I'm going to start. Memories of my childhood live between the rings of sand around my ankles and the desert heat in my lungs. I still believe that nothing washes worry from tired skin better than the Nile and my grandma's hands. Every day, I go to school with the weight of dead neighbors on my shoulders. The first time I saw bomb smoke, it didn't wind and billow like heat from the kitchen hearth, but it forced itself on the Darfur sky, smothering the sun with tears that it stole from our bodies. The worst thing about genocide isn't the hunger, the murder, the politics, the government-paid soldiers that chase you across borders, and in the camps is the silence. For 3 months, they closed the schools down because people like us are an eyesore. So the first month, we took it. The second month, we waited. And the third month, we met underneath the date palm trees, drinking up every second our teachers gave us, turning fruit pits into fractions. And on the last day, they came with a message, put them in their place. We didn't stand a chance. Flesh was never meant to dance with silver bullets. So we prayed for the sun to come and melt daggers from our backs, lifted our voices up to God until the clouds were spent for weeping in the sand. Beneath our toes echoed with the song of every soul that ever walked before us. I hid underneath the bed that day with 4 other people. 12 years later, and I can't help but wonder where my cousins hid when the soldiers torched the houses, threw the bodies in the wells. So if the weapons didn't get you, the poison would, and sometimes they didn't want to use bullets because it would cost them more than we did. What does it matter? I've seen 16 ways to stop a heart when you build nations on someone's bones. What sense does it make to break them? In one day, my mother choked on rifle smoke. My father washed the blood from his face. My uncles carried half the bodies to the hospital and the rest to the grave, and we watched. For every funeral we planned, there were 60 we couldn't. Half the sand in the Sahara tastes a lot like powdered bone. And when the soldiers came, our blood on their ankles, I remember their laces. Scarlet footprints on the floor, I remember waking to the sound of hushed voices in the night, etched with the kind of sorrow that turns even the loudest dreams to ash. Our parents came home with broken collarbones and the taste of fear carved into their skin, and it was impossible to believe in anything. Fear is the coldest thing in the desert, and it burns you, bows you down to half your height, and owns you, and no one hears you, because what could grow in the desert? Anyway, thank you. So, I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about my journey. And when I think about it, I thought, how did I get where I am? How did I go from Darfur to Yemen to the US? I grew up in the US. I've lived there for like 20-something years now. It was my birthday like 5 days ago. I'm 24. Hey. But I thought maybe it's resilience, because my grandmother, she passed away in 2015, but she never learned to read or write, because women and girls weren't allowed to do that back then where she was from. And I, her granddaughter, graduated from Yale University last year. And it was like, oh, is this resilience? Is this what it feels like? But I thought, no, there has to be more to the story. So the first time I learned about genocide, I was about 10 years old. I walked in on my mother crying, and I asked her why so many people in our family were dying. And I don't remember the words that she used to describe genocide to her 10-year-old daughter, but I remember the feeling. We felt completely alone, as if no one could hear us. And that was when I started to write poetry, to convince people to see and hear us. But then I learned it's easy to be seen. I mean, look at me. I'm an African girl with a scarf on my head, American accent on my tongue, and a story that makes everything seem a little bit easier in comparison. But it's hard to convince people that they deserve to be seen or heard. These flowers are so beautiful, they're distracting, just keep looking at them. But it's difficult to convince people that they deserve to be seen and heard. And so when I think about my story, I think more than about resilience, I think about something that happened my senior year of college. I studied anthropology and biology. I'm pre-med. I got a certificate in global health. I'm going into medicine, hopefully, be like you guys. But I used poetry, and it came in the way senior year of college because I was trying to go to this competition of poetry. And I talked to one of my professors. I had gotten permission from all the other professors, but this one lab professor in a class of about 12 people, he said to me, "You can't go." And I said, "But it's a world competition. I promise you, it's really, really important to me." And he just said, "Nope, I'm not going to let you go. You need to choose between your grades and your hobby." Very patronizing. But so then I said to him, "If it was a science competition, would you let me go? If it was a world science championship?" He said, "But that's different." And I asked him why or how is it different. He didn't have an answer, so he let me go. I went on to become the world champion of spoken word poetry and to break 3 world records. So he was wrong. And when I was closing the speech at my graduation, I was the closing speaker, he took a picture of me and put it on his wall of fame of all the scientists that graduated from his course. And what he did, what that professor did, is that he challenged me. And by challenging me, he inspired me. So that's really what I'm here to talk to you about today, the power of inspiration and how we don't give it enough credit for what it does. Because in my experience, love inspires love, passion inspires passion, intelligence inspires intelligence. And so I always ask myself, and I want you to ask yourself, what do you inspire? What are you? It can either silence you, it can repel you. You can think, no, I don't want to be anywhere near that, not on my news feed, not in my life, or it can propel you forward. So how do you let things drive you? How do you transform your experiences into action and your passion into action? I like to answer that by using poetry. And I told you already that I'm a nerd and that I studied bio. I'm bogged down by the numbers all the time. Like that is my trait, science. But I use poetry to speak because I think that it breaks down all the barriers between you and another human being. When you are seeing somebody speak to you this way, it's very difficult not to respond very viscerally. So when someone talks to you politically, for instance, I think that you're compelled to respond politically. You see it in arguments, debates. If somebody speaks to you academically, you're compelled to respond academically. If someone speaks to you with hate, you're compelled to respond with hate. But if they speak to you with your humanity, you respond with your humanity. Whether that's compassion, whether it's innovation, whatever human thing you could put forward. For me, it's poetry. That is how you should respond. So what I want to leave you with is 1, push back against silence, push back against everything that is happening to you. Hey. 2, sorry, respond with your humanity. And I know earlier we heard about what is at the basis of humanity and humanitarian work, but at the same time, turning that into responding with your humanity, I think, is the fastest way to break down the conversation, the structures that hold up all of the violence that we see today. There's the violence that is very open, that we see in the news and that we work against, or we see it in the hospital beds. But there's also another kind of violence that's structural, and we only find out about it years and years later when you look at 2 resumes and you take John Smith, but you don't take Muhammad Ali, God rest his soul. But there's a third kind of violence that I'm only starting to understand. It's the one that's so deeply rooted in our societies that we don't know how to name it. And how can you fight something you don't know how to name? I think that's the importance of knowing and being careful about what you say and how you break down the structures that uphold the kind of violence that we see in the world today. What does that look like on an individual level? Challenging that uncle across the table who says, I don't think we should take any more of them. Or, oh, I heard about that girl. She shouldn't have dressed that way. Challenge those conversations. Break down the words. That's how we start. And that's how we can put everything back to the humanity in the center. So whatever you go forward into doing, and whatever numbers you have to deal with, or people, or work, make sure that you bring the humanity, and not just the outside humanity, but your own at the center of it. Because, as I said, love inspires love, but I think also humanity inspires humanity. If we break down the way that we approach conflict resolution, that we approach change, we can create a collective responsibility for peace. We can create something that challenges everyone and inspires everyone too. So this is the last poem I'm going to leave you with. Is everybody okay? You're all so quiet. Okay. This poem is called Head Over Heels. I'm trying to think, is there anything else I wanted to say? No, I think that's about it. So here goes. They hand me the microphone as my shoulders sink under the weight of this dress. The woman says, The 1 millionth refugee just left South Sudan, can you comment? I feel my feet rock back and forth on the heels my mother bought, begging the question, do we stay or is it safer to choose flight? My mind echoes through the numbers. 1 million gone, 400,000 dead in Darfur, 2 million displaced, and this lump takes over my throat as if each of those bodies just found a grave right here in my esophagus. Our once country, all north and south and east and west, so restless, the Nile couldn't hold us together, and you asked me to summarize. They talk about the numbers as if this isn't still happening, as if 500,000 didn't just die in Syria, as if 5,000 aren't still making their final stand at the bottom of the Mediterranean, as if there aren't entire volumes full of fact sheets about our genocides, and now they want me to write one. Fact, we never talked over breakfast because the warplanes would swallow our voices. Fact, my grandpa didn't want to leave home, so he died in a war zone. Fact, a burning bush without God is just a fire. I measure the distance between what I know and what it's safe to say on a microphone. Do I talk about the violence, displacement? Do I mention the sorrow, how it's never as simple as what you see on TV, how there are weeks' worth of fear before the camera's on? Do I tell her about our bodies, how they are 60% water, but we still burn like driftwood, making fuel of our sacrifice? Do I tell her the men died first, mothers forced to watch the slaughter, as they came for our children, scattering them across the continent until our homes sank, that even castles sink at the bite of the bomb? It sounds too harsh. I tell her about the elderly, our heroes, too weak to run, too expensive to shoot, how they would march them, hands raised, rifles at their backs into the fire, how their walking sticks kept the flames alive. It sounds too harsh for a bundle of wires and an audience to swallow, too relentless, like the valley that filled with the putrid smoke of our deaths. Is it better in verse? Can a stanza become a burial shroud? If you don't see me cry, will you listen better? Will the pain leave when the microphone does? Will it sting less if I say it softly? 30 seconds for the sound bite, and now 3 minutes for the poem. My tongue goes dry, the same way we died, becoming ash without ever having been coal. I feel my left leg go numb, and I realize that I locked my knees, bracing for impact. I never wear shoes I can't run in. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like we should stay silent for a while, but we're not going to. We have to push back, that's true. Thank you, Anna. Seems futile to say, and now for the conclusions. But that's what we're going to do. We are going to continue talking, like Emmy is telling us to do. And we need to talk with our hearts. So that's what we're going to do. We will start our summary of main conclusions from the breakout sessions now. Here to give us an account of the main findings from the first session on current challenges is Teko Mohammed. She's a Somali-born doctor who has worked tirelessly for the benefit of refugees in Somalia. And we're very happy to have you here, Teko, and the floor is yours.
I think after these two great presentations, these two young girls, we just have to stay quiet. They are the testimony of the power of youth. They are the testimony of when you give the power and knowledge and mentor youth, That's who they can become. My session was a little bit complicated because I have a team of very intelligent academia, and I try to summarize and write it down their wonderful big words, which I don't speak to. So it was a current challenge, and really I enjoy it, and we try to do as much as possible to talk in depth what peace means to us. And we decided we have to redefine peace. And as I think my summary in my head, we might never reach a true peace in this world, but maybe we should start a conversation. Maybe we should start a security for humanity, how I can be secure, the cities we are living in, and the travel we do. Other great important point I liked is how we can talk to the people who are not like-minded like us. We are here, we all think world peace is great, we think same thing, we are agreeing, we're nodding, we are applauding, we are happy to listen to each other, but can we go out there and talk to the people who are thinking different than us, who think we are extremists or who thinks we are other than what they are thinking? And there was a lot of great points. And one point was today's war is a business. How we can give those who making a money from today's war and how we can increase profit for peace during the peace and try to not increase profit during the war. So giving another alternative businesses, the young men or whoever making a profit out of the war. And it's very, very important, crucial, and what I witnessed in Somalia for the last quarter of century in Somalia war, a lot of people benefited. And another point was today's world technology, especially young people here, it's a lot of bad stories go viral. And one thing I hear in US, like if doesn't bleed, doesn't lead, which is terrible to me. The bad news goes very interesting, and it goes, Professor Uni mentioned how we can make a good story go viral, how young people can help us to listen to a good story and resend and reshare and retweet and let that good story go viral, because our world is not that all bad. It's not gloomy. There's a sun anywhere, even here in Iceland. And there was a lot of points, really, and I apologize, my team, if I forget something interesting, on how we can expect, how we can teach. We talked about teaching, a lot of important points. We had a teacher in our group that we are restricted as teachers. They cannot teach and share what's going on in the world, otherwise the parent will send millions of emails and that teacher will be fired. So how we can exchange, and the way I put the challenge, I talked about it, is that we have a lot of challenges in the world, and the only way we can save that and stop the extremists is educating each other. When you say a context of education is different, because today's world, who are most of educated people, voted for the bad presidents we have now today. And so education has different understanding. So how we can get a right education, right time, right moment, and how we can support our youth. And I liked, really, Professor Uni repeated many times, it's not our position to empower the youth, it's their position to take the power. So I encourage every single young person here around the world to stand up and to take their power, because we are going to destroy this world if they don't stop us. And in many ways. I like another real point, I hope I'm not going over my 5 minutes. It's one of our members was politician and say, politics, it doesn't solve much, it paralyzes sometimes. You don't know what to do, so many policies to write and so many things to do. But I think it's paralyzation, or it's not only politics, it's everything in humanity, in humanitarian today. When we get overwhelmed and hear so many things, especially when I share my story to my friends, they get paralyzed, they don't know how to help me. Because there's so many things going on in my country and there's so many issues to solve. And in a bottom line, I think I will end this. we should have a good governance. I cannot fix Somali healthcare if I don't have a good governance. I cannot do a prevention, I cannot save the people. So the bottom line, we need to be all politicians. I think we all need to be involved in politics, and we all need to involve what is good for our common ground. So, and let's a good story go viral. Thank you.
Thank you, Deku. And now for the main conclusions of the second session. We have, the second session was on empowering young people, and we have Achelek Christian Leke here. He is an activist and peace advocate from Cameroon, named the Commonwealth Young Person of the Year in 2016. I think that's probably correct, not 15. Yes, the floor is yours, Achelek.
Thank you very much. It has been a great time in Iceland, and yesterday I didn't do my homework, and I almost died of cold. But thank you very much. Our session was about youth empowerment, and I was leading the conversation within this during this session, and I started with a story of a young boy who was born in a violent community, and he grew up actually perpetrating violence in one way or the other, fighting on the streets, and at one point in time he lost his peers, and you know, parents could solve their problems only by fighting, and reconciliation was not actually one of the things which they knew about, or who to mediate and all of that. And at sometimes his family members could only have to change the location where they were born in order to get jobs or to get into school, and that was how difficult it was. But this young boy at one point in time saw the need to take a right turn and started working for peace. Well, this is my story actually, and from physical brushes to, you can name the scars. My drive for youth empowerment and peace building was based on my personal experience. I didn't read violence in any book. I lived it, I saw it firsthand, and I know what it means to be violent. And now talking about peace for the past 10 years, and from that community where even politicians would not believe of something good to come from, I was able to work with a team of people who believed in the power of empowering a young person and giving opportunity to lead change, to change perceptions that young people are not agents of violence, they are ambassadors of peace and change, and I'm a living testimony. And also to break the myth that no matter where you are from, no matter your past, you can become a better hero by fighting for peace. And I had the pleasure to be recognized by Her Majesty the Queen of England as the Commonwealth Young Person of the Year, and as the most influential young person in Cameroon in 2016, and among 100 in Africa. This is a young boy whom no one thought anything good could come from that location. And that was the bane in our conversation today, the power of investing in one young person, the power of investing in young people. It has a powerful role to play. And within this conversation, the whole discussion about entrepreneurship came about, and what is the role of entrepreneurship in preventing and fighting against violent extremism, which is something which I'm so passionate about. I spent some time in Maiduguri, where we have Boko Haram, and every night we had 3 to 6 bomb attacks, but I was there because I'm a young person, I've been empowered, and I'm resilient. And I saw evidence of young people who turned themselves into local vigilante because of love for one another. And I remember the governor of Maiduguri said the involvement of young people as vigilante groups has been a game changer in the fight against Boko Haram. This is the kind of resilience young people have been demonstrating. As I said, I didn't read about peace in any book. I've been working for it in difficult moments, even when your parents would think you have nothing to offer. But still, youth empowerment is very important. And when we talked about entrepreneurship, we had this silence in the room of how unemployment can drive young people into violence. And today we can all testify that the most inspiring entrepreneurs are young people. Be it social or economic, they are changing lives of people and providing jobs. And I reflected, and I looked at myself. The organization I lead offers employment for 7 people. This is the beauty behind empowering one young person. We also had evidence of young people we worked with in prisons who were thrown away in jails and correctional facilities. But today, back in their communities, they are serving as role models. It is possible to transform a young person who had a history of violence or who had killed or done whatsoever by empowering. And we went ahead to say government must understand that before we intervene, there is the need for us to understand the context of what we are providing as a solution. Because always we want to transplant ideas. The best idea in Iceland might not be the best idea in Syria. The best idea in Syria might not be the best idea in Cameroon. And if we invest our money to empower young people with this perspective, it's going to be a mere charade. It's going to be an elephant-wide project, because we need to understand that people are different and there's a need for us to conduct a need-based assessment before we provide solutions to problems. Because when this is done, we are able to provide sustainable solutions. We also went ahead to talk about the fact that young people must be brought on the table when it comes to youth empowerment. Do not fix things and bring it for us when we were not there when it was decided upon. That's a mistake that has been done. And we have seen evidence of programs which was designed by young people on the same table, with the old, the young, the politicians, everyone on the same table. And it has worked, and that's the kind of practice which we must uphold. And this was shared with a lot of evidence, and from our sisters and our brothers in the room, and we concluded that there's the need for youth empowerment to be looked at from a different perspective. We went ahead to look at the whole issue of migrants in Iceland. It was quite inspiring because we had our guru when it comes to entrepreneurship development. And this young lady brought this whole concept out and said, we have this issue of migrants. Why don't we make it better? And you know what we told her? We told her that is just a startup you have there in your mind. You need to start up something as a social entrepreneur and help this country to become better, because you are a citizen in the country, you know the problem, and that's the best thing about young people. And that is why we must involve young people, because we make up 60-65% of most populations. If we want to decide for our president to be a young person, it's going to be a young person. If we want a woman, if we want whosoever to be a president, it would be, because we make up the majority of the population. And if there's any development without young people seen as partners, we are not assets any longer. We are not begging for this. We are there to make things work, and we have testimonies, we have examples, we have evidence, concrete, not literature, not things which have been written or things which were assumed, of young people who are doing a lot with little or no support. And we had this other example shared of how people misuse opportunities. I grew up from where no one thought something could come up from, but I was able to break the chain and lead in global conversation on youth, on peace building, and today we have a UN Security Council resolution on youth, peace, and security. What about a young person who was born with a golden spoon in his or her mouth? What are you doing? It is time for us to use satiric examples to push people to become better, because the major problem for youth radicalization is identity, be it poverty, unemployment, education. When the whole issue of not knowing who you are, the sense of belonging and purpose is not there, you are a potential recruit by a violent extremist group. Be it you are a professor, be it you are a PhD holder, you are a main recruit. Because I always make this analogy. 0 times 1,000. What do we have? We have 0, right? So if you are a human, if you are a person born of a woman and a man, and you are not morally and ethically upright, no matter your level of education, no matter your level of social class, you are a potential danger to your community. And that is why we recommended that every program, educational program, should capitalize on imbibing in people civic education, and making peace building not more of academics, but based on practice, using exercises and games to imbibe in young people a culture of peace. That is very important. UNESCO talks about culture of peace, but in practice, they are not doing that job. But I'm here to reiterate that in our programming, if we want peace to be sustainable, firstly, we need to look at peace as something that starts from the heart. Secondly, we need to work as partners, because the Sustainable Development Goal says, Goal 17, we need to be partners for development. So we need to work together. And the last thing is peace building is a collective process. It takes each and every one of us. It takes both poetry, it takes football, it takes handball, it takes music, it takes everything to make peace sustainable. And personally, I'm a living testimony, and I'm very available to share more insight of what young people are doing, because I'm opportune to lead young people across the Commonwealth when it comes to peace building. And as I said earlier, I've seen violence on hand, and I know what it means to grow up in violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your words. And now the third session. Elise Ferron is a lecturer and university researcher from Tampere Peace Research Institute. We look forward to hearing the findings of the session on radicalization and extremism.
Well, thank you, everyone. Actually, a lot of things have already been said by the former speakers, but nevertheless, I will try to do justice to all the very interesting debates we had in this session. Well, as Pia just said, our session dealt with patterns or radicalization and extremism, and so because radicalization is very often equated or understood to be about Islamist radicalization, I chose to give a lecture on right-wing extremism, and especially on the case of the Soldiers of Odin. You might have heard about them. They were created in Finland and then created other groups, other branches in other countries. There is one in Iceland, there is one in Norway, one in Sweden, one in Germany, in the US, in Canada, and so on and so forth. And in order to also show that there are different facets of radicalization, and that many of them mean conflict in our societies, not conflict far away, but also within our own societies. So we discussed this around three main, let's say, themes or questions. The first one dealt with the patterns of radicalization and the similarities between the different types of extremism. And we all agreed on the fact that there are very similar patterns. Even if the ideologies are different, there are similar patterns in the way people radicalize, and especially in the way those groups, those extremist groups, attract young men. In Western societies, but also elsewhere. And as it has been said just a minute ago, many of these young men are driven by a need to belong to a group, to belong to a certain family, and the need to be recognized, you know, as belonging to that group. And the actions of these groups are very often similar, even if the ideologies differ. And they want, especially, to protect something they believe in, whether it is their religion, whether it is their culture, their status in the society, and so on and so forth. And the drivers of their actions can mostly be located in emotions, and especially in negative emotions such as fear, humiliation, the fear of losing what you have. Also, we discussed the role of the media and of words. This is something I will come back to in a minute. The role of the media and of the social media in disseminating those ideas and in making those groups stronger, whether we speak about Islamist radicalization or if we speak about right-wing extremism. We also, of course, discussed the role of the practical context and the fact that many of these young men who are driven to these groups are unemployed, they have very few perspectives, and they feel deprivation, they feel marginalized in different ways, but this is what they feel. Then we discussed the responses, how can we respond to this phenomenon of radicalization and extremism? Well, the first, I think that's our first answer, and it has been mentioned already, it's education. And I think we need to educate as early as possible people on religion, on other cultures, on migration, on why people migrate, tolerance, education to tolerance, and this has to start as early as possible. This is not something that we can that can only be addressed later when people are adults. Also, there is a very clear need to engage with these groups which are isolated and marginalized. They recreate closed societies and closed groups, but they also feel very isolated from the rest of the society. And there is a need to, instead of trying to discipline them, on the contrary, try to favor a let's talk approach, listening to them and not prejudge them, because it's very important to try to drive them back. How can we attract them back to the values of tolerance if we have just a repression kind of attitude? And we also went back to the use of words. Words are very important. We have to be careful with the way we frame issues, with the way we frame, for instance, the problem of migration. If we say this is a problem, or if we say this is an issue, or if this is a challenge, depending on how we talk about this, it might fuel radicalization. And also, conversely, words are very important in order to diffuse the challenge of radicalization and extremism. For instance, in the case I presented of the soldiers of Odin, the groups opposing the soldiers of Odin in Finland, for instance, have been using humor in order to deter the soldiers of Odin and ridicule them. And it has been very effective, because they are a matter of a joke now in Finland. So I think it can be very effective. And finally, we discussed how to try to divert young men away from these groups. How can we make young men not join these groups or not or quitting them? So first of all, we all agreed on the fact that we need to keep young men in schools, especially young men, because they are those who are more likely to be attracted to these groups. So we need to keep people in schools. We also need to address mental health issues, and I think we tend to overlook these mental health issues, and that the fact that anger, depression, all of these issues are not treated properly in policy, and that we should be more attentive to signs of mental health issues. Also, we agreed on the fact that we need more research on what leads these men to radicalize, because there is like a black box. We know the background, like they are unemployed, for instance, they come from marginalized families, and then, poof, they are radicalized. They are in extremist groups, but we don't really understand what triggers, what is the knowledge, what happens, what triggers the acting out, towards this radicalization. And so, I think that probably the very interesting part of the conversations we had was about realizing that radicalization is not something that happens outside of us. It's, it's a pattern. It's our problem. It's our issue. It's not something that is external and that happens because of external factors. It is for us to tackle. It is our issue, and we cannot just simply blame other cultures or, others, externals, influence, and that this is within our societies. And if we want to think about peace, we have to think about peace within our own societies also, not just peace elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. We have a few minutes to see if there are any questions or comments from you here in the audience. I know it's a little bit Too bad with the lighting. Maybe we'll have some more lights now. Excellent. Thank you. This is how things work here. Excellent. So just show me if you have a question or a remark to make. I'd just like to see your hand, and then I would also ask that you give us your name and to whomever you would like to direct your comment or your question. We're all being very quiet now. That's very strange. Oh, here we have the first one. Yes.
My name is Höfði, and I'd just like to comment on the importance of the words we use. When we say fighting for peace, fighting against extremism, fight for your right, can we get peace by fighting?
Wrong use of words, maybe? Yes. Who would like to pick up on this? Yeah? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think words are very crucial when it comes to peace, for example. Unfortunately, we are in a world where we work with famous mantras. We have issues of counter, for example, is already a military term. Fighting is a military term because historically, peace have always been won through war, through fighting. But I think there's a need for us to change narratives, and this lies in the hands of researchers as well as, of course, practitioners, for us to ensure that we change this narrative, because now we are talking about soft skills. We are moving from counter-terrorism programs to counter-violent extremism programs, which takes a more holistic perspective. And of course, raising such worries in avenues like this is very important, because policymakers as well need to reduce the use of these harsh words. Because if this is done gradually, I think it's a process for us to change this language, just as strategies are changing. So far, I think that's my opinion based on that. You are very, very right on the kind of terms which we use when it comes to building peace.
Either one?
Because you mentioned the role of mental health and increasing mental health services, and the role of that in promoting peace. And we also discussed this in our group on empowering young people. And I would like to ask you to elaborate a bit on that. What do you think is needed to increase mental health services so that we can promote peace in a more efficient way?
Thank you for your question. That's a very good question. I think, for instance, I will quit talking about right-wing extremism for a minute and take, if you think about the refugees and asylum seekers, for instance, if you think about, as we've heard with various testimonies, if you think about all they go through before they actually come to where they come, the trauma, what they've witnessed, what their parents have witnessed, people they've lost, etc., etc., then it's quite obvious that they, and also the trauma of simply quitting, your homeland and settling somewhere where you're not seen as welcome. Think that many of these people are fleeing political violence, and then they are seen as those who are potential terrorists, and they are fleeing the terrorists. What does it mean to you to be in a situation where your life, is threatened, and then suddenly you're seen as the one threatening the others. So I think there is a need for support. In that domain, Nordic countries are quite advanced. There are several centers for helping survivors of torture, for instance. I don't know if there is one in Iceland, but there is certainly, there are two in Finland, there is one in Denmark, there is one in the UK too. So I think this is something that is needed, that there is too much oh, well, maybe not too much, but when there is emphasis on integration of migrants, asylum seekers, etc., it's mostly socioeconomic integration. And I think that we need also to address the mental health issues that it might have, and which are significant, I think. And well, conversely, when you speak about young men, I mean, it's a bit of a joke when you're in gender studies and you speak about the crisis of masculinity, but it does exist to a certain extent. The questioning of patriarchal privileges and the lack of access of lack of jobs for non-highly educated men. You know, it is a problem in Western societies, and it leads those young men to question their own self-worth, you know, who they are, what's their worth, etc., etc. And this cannot be ignored, because if you feel humiliated, and because this is how they frame it, if you feel humiliated, then you're bound to be aggressive in order to, you know, compensate for that humiliation. So I think that more mental health support should be offered in schools, especially during teenagehood, because that's a critical time for both boys and girls. And as I said, for migrants and asylum seekers, certainly mental health issues should, you know, be higher up on the agenda.
I think we will do the last question then, over here.
Hi, my name is Altair. I wanted to thank the speakers, just really wonderful points to come to think about as ways to approach and to kind of activate us individually as ways to approach peace. I just wanted to mention one thing. I've been thinking very deeply for a long time about ways to bring peace forward, and I've come to this feeling that there actually is this hidden, perhaps, cause of violence in our culture, and I believe it's essentially the science of materialism, that science that tells us that there's nothing more beyond this humanity than what we see in concrete objects and what's around us, when in truth, it has been statistically proven the power of meditation, the power of prayer, and the power of intention has been statistically proven to cause drops in violence worldwide. So I've undertaken the task of creating an app that may allow simultaneous worldwide meditation with the intention of peace. And so that's just something that I wanted to state, that the current paradigm in science, I think, is failing us in the sense that it does not incorporate anything other than what we see. Quantum physics is moving beyond that, and I think when quantum physics really touches on where it needs to be, we will be able to reach those places that empower ourselves individually. And I just wanted to ask anyone that maybe a programmer might approach me, or anyone concerning the app, or if anyone has any of you have any thoughts about perhaps the power of group prayer, meditation, and intention. Thank you so much.
It also provides a great bridge to our next session, actually. But for the three of you, if you'd like to respond to this, please, that's fine. And then we move on to the next session. Yes, would you like to?
Thank you for your comment. We had this conversation earlier. We have to redefine what peace means to each of us individually. And hearing you and listening to you, and we can have another MIT thing. There's a whole continent. We don't have apps. It doesn't work. Millions of people don't have access to the smartphones. So how are you going to reach? So this is the basic communication of understanding who we deal in. And they are part of our world. So we have to come up how to communicate. I love Apple, and I have nothing against it. And I love the Siri, but she doesn't get me. Every time I push, she will tell me, I don't understand you. And on top of that, she calls me names. So she cannot pronounce my name correctly. She will tell me I'm a chicken. So really, diqat means in Somali. So and we need to create series that understands each of us. So and we have to work on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the whole issue of material goes to. We have conversations of how greed actually funds conflict and violence, and we have scholars like Collier talks about that. But if we take steps further and in context which we live, I think one of the reasons why we have a lot of violence in the world is because we believe a lot in material things. We are so greedy and we don't want to let things go. Now, we design programs for rehabilitation and reintegration. Young people have stories like mine, or young people who have done things which are worse, former militants or former Boko Haram recruits or something of that sort. And, programs on meditation and speaking to yourself is very, very important because I've seen it work. I didn't read about these also. I saw it work. We tried it and it worked. They could speak to themselves. They were able to identify so much in themselves. And I think prayers is also very important, but based on the context. I'm from a Christian country, a Catholic country for that matter, and we cannot run programs without prayers because it connects these young people to you. You have something which you identify yourself with. If you run a program without it starting with prayers, they would have to comment that what's going on. And we think starting without prayers is evil. But there are communities where, you start with no prayers, it's fine. So there's a need for context, just as she said. The program, it's quite powerful. And of course, we have many young people in the space of promoting young people's participation in peace building from other countries who believe in the use of apps and have developed apps of that nature, especially when it comes to promoting peace and how to build peace internally. So of course, we could talk a lot about organizations that I know that I've come across who work on programs of that nature. But as she said, context is very, very important. If not, it would be an investment which might not really pull. But I've seen it work. I've heard about meditation doing a lot in people's lives. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes, yes. You want to keep it. That's good. Okay, now we move to our final session. This is actually where we move from the ideas that we've been talking about and find out how to make them into projects. We have with us Georgina Campbell-Flatter. She's Executive Director of MIT Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship, and Senior Lecturer in Technological Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Strategic Management at MIT Sloan School of Management. So we are very happy to have you here, and I'd also like to mention that Alvogen actually supported us in bringing Georgina to us. So let's give her a hand of applause.
Okay, so we're just going to do a quick change of the presentation here. Okay. I really couldn't think of a more appropriate comment and idea to kind of transition into my presentation. I think I've been so inspired by today, and thank you to all the guests and speakers and to everybody for their contribution. I feel, I'm going to leave this room with lots of ideas that we can move to impact. I feel like we're all agents of change here. So in line with some of the conversations that we've been having, particularly this afternoon, I wanted to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about the role that entrepreneurship, and more specifically entrepreneurs, the role that we can play in contributing to peace and prosperity. And so to do this, I'm going to celebrate 3 agents of change, 3 principled leaders, 3 peacemakers that I have been honored to meet during my time at MIT. And I'm going to celebrate their stories, but I'm also going to try and tease out some of the leadership traits that we've all kind of been mentioning over the last few hours. And then I also want to, I'm going to end my presentation by kind of teasing out the role that entrepreneurship educators can play in inspiring and educating change agents. But first, I did want to just introduce myself briefly. So I'm the executive director of the Legatum Center, and essentially what I do is I'm dedicated to serving entrepreneurs who are building and scaling businesses in emerging markets. I'm also a senior lecturer at MIT, which means that I'm very, very interested in the role that we as entrepreneurship educators can play in driving that change and educating people on the values, and also equipping entrepreneurs with the skill set that they can take with them to build successful and principled businesses. I'm also mother to this wonderful little girl here, and I feel like an introductory slide is just not doesn't represent me without showing my family. And with that, I did want to just tell a short story myself. So this conference reminded me of a letter that I'm actually writing to my little girl, Penelope Penny. And it's inspired by a very cheesy YouTube video that you may not have seen, where I asked my family and friends to write a letter to Penny for her 2nd birthday that I'm going to open on her 18th birthday, rather than a gift. We have way too many plastic toys. So I've received letters from near and far, from grandparents, from aunts and uncles, from cousins. But interestingly, I've actually found it quite hard to write a letter myself. And why? And I think despite only being a mum for 2.5 years, I feel like I've got so much to share, so much advice that I want to give my little girl. And my ultimate goal is for her to be happy and for her to inflict happiness on others. And I think the speakers we've heard from today have certainly achieving that goal. But what framework and values can you teach a young child so that they can kind of embed that and make it their purpose to follow this dream? So I actually, when I received the invitation to come and speak, I was excited because it kind of, the light switch went off, and I thought, wow, you know what? I work with these amazing change agents every single day at my job with MIT, and seeing these entrepreneurs go and build and scale incredible businesses around the world. How about using that as an opportunity to share some lessons for my daughter? So with that, I'm going to start with this story about Joseph. Joseph is from northern Nigeria, the same town where 276 females were kidnapped by the Boko Haram in 2014. And he came to Lagos, Nigeria, in search of a better life for himself and his family. I met Joseph while visiting Nigeria, or Lagos, this summer. And I was visiting a company called Max. Max is a startup based in the Yaba region, for those of you who have been to Lagos, a very cool place. And what essentially Max is they're a last-mile delivery company. So what that means for a restaurant that's in Lagos City, they will call Max, and Max will deliver that product, some hot food, to a hungry person on the other side of the city. What that means for a bank is that they'll call Max and they'll ask Max to deliver a bank card securely to a customer. What that means for an individual is that I can send cash to a friend in a secure and safe way. And but what blew me away when meeting Joseph, who works for Max and who's a delivery driver for Max, is that Max is far more than just a company serving restaurants and banks and e-commerce companies in Lagos City. I would say that from the inside, you could be in Silicon Valley. It looks like a typical startup. Post-it notes on the wall, ramen noodles in the cupboard.
You overhear sales calls, you overhear computer scientists discussing the next cool algorithm that they plan to build. And then when you step outside, you see and realize the scale of the challenge that Max is trying to solve. For anyone who's been to Lagos, this picture is probably very familiar to you. It takes 3 to 4 hours to drive 20 kilometers. And this is a city that's urbanizing at record speeds. 21 million citizens currently live in Lagos, and 80 people arrive per day to seek opportunities. And at the moment, there are not enough jobs. And we've talked about the importance of jobs and how that can lead to disaster. And so what is Max doing to help solve this problem? Well, they're actually tackling this challenge in a very innovative way, because last mile delivery in Lagos doesn't just mean that I get hot food in 30 minutes. That means that small micro businesses across the city can reach more customers. That means that their existence depends on better infrastructure within the city of Lagos. And so what they're doing is providing, it's a very simple innovation, motorcycles around the city so that they can weave around traffic. Innovative kind of boxes that keep food warm and bank cards safe. Champions, they're motorcycle drivers who do the deliveries. And there's incredible incentives involved and engaged. The picture of Joseph I showed you, he was wearing a very cool jacket, leather jacket. He was so proud to be a motorcycle driver for Max, and this is in a place where motorcycle driving is one of the worst professions that you can go into. It's disrespected. Many people can get licenses regardless of their ability to drive. It's not like Uganda where you jump on a boda and you can go wherever you want. And so what Max has done is brought respect to a profession. How have they done that? They've created psychometric testing for the drivers, these smart algorithms that link the psychometric tests to the way that the motorcycle drivers drive. They've used technology to create route optimization around the city. Google Maps isn't a thing there in the same way that it is here or in Boston. They've also created a system for geotagging addresses. So this means that, in Lagos, addresses, again, they don't exist in the same way as they do here. So Max, when they finally discovered where to deliver a package, they geotag and they collect that data. So they're literally building a map of Lagos from the bottom up. And I'm telling this story because this represents what entrepreneurship is all about. There is a human element to it and an economic element. There is human impact and there's economic impact. There's the world-class training that Max provides the motorcycle drivers. The health and safety, they provide helmets for every single driver that's part of their network. They pay 2 times the income. They provide career growth, 0% loans. That means that Joseph, in 1 year's time, will own that motorcycle driver. And I talked to the founder, he doesn't care if Joseph leaves the company after that. He can use that motorcycle to taxi people around and to provide more income for himself and his family. They provide health insurance. The founders are principled leaders that have built, they don't have to do this, but they've built the infrastructure into the business because, number one, it makes business sense. You want to be able to trust the champions that deliver your packages, but they also care. They're mission-driven entrepreneurs. On the economic side, $1 million in sales last year, 20% growth month to month, and that's leading to 100 jobs. These guys have existed for 2.5 years. 100 jobs already created in Lagos, 6,000 indirect jobs created. Those are the small to medium-sized businesses that they're serving and helping to deliver their products. And that means 50,000 lives already impacted by 2, because they're co-founder entrepreneurs. I'm not going to go into the founder's story, but I did just want to highlight the path that Adeteyo Mamadaro, the founder of Max, took. He grew up in Lagos. We were talking about understanding a problem. He's identified and experienced this problem from within Lagos. He did come to MIT to pursue his entrepreneurial dreams. And in between, he worked for the oil sector, where he became increasingly frustrated by the wealth of the oil sector and the 99% of the GDP going directly to the 1%, and wanted to change that, and saw entrepreneurship as an opportunity to do that. My second story is about Veronica. Veronica is on the right here. Veronica lives in Kibera, which is one of the largest slum communities in Nairobi, Kenya. And she is one of 2 million people within the slums of Kenya alone. And she's a sales manager for a company called Soko. Soko is an ethical fashion brand. I'm actually modeling some of their jewelry today. But Soko is not just a fashion brand. What they do is they work with artisans across the slums of Nairobi, artisans who are highly skilled in making handmade brass jewelry. And what Soko does, through a simple mobile phone, is connect these artisans with designers in San Francisco who know the market in America. And they send through this kind of smart ERP system the designs to these artisans across, you're talking 2,500 artisans across Nairobi, decentralized. And they send the designs, they can make payments through the mobile phone. And with that, they're able to create these beautiful handmade designs at competitive costs to other jewelry makers. Now, from what the consumer sees, what you and I would see, is this beautiful ethical brand, Soko. Beautiful handmade jewelry that's usually sold for hundreds of dollars, and believe me, it is affordable. On the back end, you see this virtual factory. And what I mean by that is this decentralized group of artisans across Nairobi who are able to connect with these designers through mobile phone. But what Veronica sees is what's most important. Veronica sees 25% of the revenue that is created from me buying this necklace. Now, let's put that into perspective. The average fair trade company gives 5% back to the artisan, Soko 25%. This is revenue. This is not profit, this is revenue. And let's remember that the average amount that goes back to the artisan is less than 1%. Retail accounts for about 1/6 of the jobs on our planet. And the average earning for a factory worker working in a retail company in China is about 50 cents a day. So you can see that Soko they're not just an ethical fashion brand, they are literally changing the way we're thinking about the manufacturing of this jewelry through a decentralized system. And it's not just Veronica that they're impacting. There are hundreds of people now. There are 85 people who work directly for Soko and their team. This is a picture that I took when I was visiting them this summer, the baby shower that they were hosting for one of their employees. People like to work for Soko, from the artisans like Veronica to the people on their sales team, the founders, all female, 3 female co-founders are dedicated to training women within the company. Veronica is actually one of the few females who started with Soko, because most of the people that they were working with originally, most of the artisans were male who had been trained by nonprofits in the city to make brass jewelry. But through Soko's dedication to capacity building, internal capacity building, they were able to train people like Veronica, who, by the way, is now a sales manager, and they've literally brought her out of poverty and her family. And Ella here had a similar journey to Teo. Ella's the founder. She was driven by passion, committed to solving this problem of helping these artisans in Nairobi, and has now been living in Nairobi for 5 years. And within 5 years, they've made $25 million in revenue. Last year, they made $3.5 million alone. And by the way, only 5% of women founders end up making more than $1 million in revenue. And Ella has made $3.5 million already in the last year. And it's through her mission-driven driven effort that she's been able to kind of build this organization. My final story is about Mithala. She is from Monterrey, Mexico. So we're moving from the continent of Africa to the country of Mexico. And she is one of 11 million people in Mexico that suffers from diabetes without access to high-quality care. Mithala was very close to committing suicide. And this was before she came across a company called Clínicas del Azúcar that's based in Monterrey, Mexico. Javier, the founder, he was just visiting me last week, and I was so inspired by his model. He spent the last 7 years building 2 clinics in Monterrey, Mexico. And what he's done is taken an innovative approach to an old problem, which is healthcare. And what he's done is you arrive in a Clínicas del Azúcar. It's kind of like a pharmacy in a mall. You arrive, you say that you are interested in getting tested for diabetes, and then you kind of go to these stations. They check your feet, they check your eyes, they take a blood test. Then you move on to a nutritionist, and the nutritionist gives you advice on how and what food to eat. Then you move on to a doctor, and you spend only 10 minutes with the doctor, but that's all you need to get the drugs to go on and live a healthy life. Javier has created a business model around this, where they charge a very low subscription fee for the year, and he's able to provide incredibly high-quality care for the fraction of the cost, in fact, 70% less than what the government spends currently in Monterrey for serving people with diabetes care. 45% of the people that come in and get his free screening stay with the Clínicas del Azúcar and pay the subscription fee, which allows him to sustain the business. The rest, they get the free screening, and then they go to the government clinics, and they get served there. But that is a win for Javier, because at least they've had the free screening, and they're able to access the care that they need. Javier now has, I mentioned that a year ago, he'd managed to get these 2 clinics in Monterrey right. But within the last year, he's set up 11 clinics, and he's opening 1 clinic a year. And when I asked him to describe his business model, he literally said it's the McDonald's of healthcare. And he's right. You know, he's applied this very interesting model, the assembly line, to a service. And he's serving low-income communities in Monterrey. And the thing that he emphasized to me was this is high-quality care. This is better care than otherwise he could provide through any other method. Now, I've told 3 stories, but these stories represent many of the students that come through the Legatum Center. Legatum means legacy in Latin, and we believe that entrepreneurship creates a legacy for the individual to share their impact with the world. But I think the main point I'm trying to make here is that entrepreneurs like Javier, like Ella, like Teo, they're agents for change. And that's social and economic. You know, these entrepreneurs are not just addressing some of the greatest challenges of all time, as articulated by the SDGs, but they're creating jobs. Jobs that will drive people out of poverty. This is a chart that I pulled, this is US data, that shows net job growth over time. And this proves that jobs come from entrepreneurs. This proves that jobs come from new businesses, not corporates. So this is net job growth over time. The dark blue represents jobs created by new businesses in the United States, entrepreneurs. The light blue represents corporates and large institutions. And you can see that net job growth is coming from the next generation of entrepreneurial leaders. And I think more than that is they're building the underlying infrastructure to support social and economic development. They're creating platforms for change. Adateo, through Max, is not just creating his licensing program that is making it, which is kind of at the core of what makes the business successful. he is now being approached by the government because the government wants to purchase his psychometric testing and his process for motorcycle licensing to improve the way that the city provides licenses. Ella is providing training for artisans, asset financing so they can purchase better equipment, and they're building out their own studios, their art studios. They're literally building the underlying infrastructure. They're going well beyond what makes sense for just core profit. And they're not just creating jobs, they're creating good jobs. They're paying their employees fair wages, not just fair wages, but what's right. They're paying 3-5 times more than the industry standard, not because there's any kind of business reason behind it, because it's the right thing to do. They're providing health insurance when they don't have to, helmets. Each of their headquarters has 24-hour access to power and the internet that their employees can access any time. You know, these are principled leadership strategies that really make a difference, because these are mission-driven leaders. They don't just care about profit, although profit is important for them to keep their business sustainable, but the mission, the profits drive the mission. The mission isn't about the profits, it's about the profits driving the mission. And I think finally, to kind of tie these entrepreneurs together, is they're building sustainable and scalable solutions. Entrepreneurship isn't about serving one patient, one artist, one motorcycle driver. Entrepreneurship is about creating a sustainable way to have impact that will go beyond Ella, will go beyond Teo, will go beyond Javier if they build the business in the right way. And I think this is what's important. And one of the points that I want to make here is it's not about the entrepreneurship, it's about the entrepreneur behind the venture. Every enterprise, behind every enterprise is an entrepreneurial leader. And I've pulled out 3 leadership characteristics that I think represents Ella, Teo, and Javier. And actually it's interesting because these themes have been brought up again and again today, using just different words for the same thing. I would say purpose. They're all driven by a goal to make the world a better place. Ella's representing marginalized artisans. Teo wants to build a better Nigeria by creating the infrastructure that's necessary to help the business the economy function. Javier wants to cure everybody of diabetes in Mexico. And there were some other words that we used today that came up in conversation that represent the same thing. Inspiration, I think we mentioned, and identity. You know, this is all part of the same thing. It's this drive, this purpose. It's beyond yourself. And so the second is principle. You know, I mentioned that these entrepreneurs aren't just creating jobs, they're creating good jobs. Capitalism has a bad name for itself because the leaders behind some of these large corporations aren't thinking about why they're there and who they can help and how they can help. And I think these leaders, the new generation of leaders, have this principled mindset where, again, and I'm stealing a quote from John Mackey, the CEO, former CEO of Whole Foods, and he said that it is about, you need to create a business where the profits drive the mission doesn't drive the profits. And I really do believe that. And I think that the entrepreneurs today have that mindset. And the final one is persistence. And again, we used another word that's come up again and again, resilience. Resilience and persistence. And this, with the purpose in mind, that drives persistence. These entrepreneurs, Javier just shared with me, he was close to bankruptcy 4 times over the last 4 years, but he kept going because he had this larger purpose in mind. So to kind of move into the last part of what I wanted to share with you today, the question that we ask ourselves at MIT and as entrepreneurship educators is, how do you build the values, these principled values and morals and ethics, and the skills to help entrepreneurs succeed? How do you build this into the curriculum and the workshops that we run on the ground for entrepreneurs to help the entrepreneurs find their way? And I think that there are kind of 3 pieces that I've pulled out of what we do at MIT, and I've seen it all around the world, that I wanted to kind of touch on. The first is discovery. And I think discovery ties very closely into purpose. You know, we as entrepreneurship educators have to commit time to helping our children and our students discover, and ourselves, discover purpose. And the way that we do that at the Legadum Center is by having a conversation, understanding, and this is another theme that's come up again and again today, is understanding the problem, understanding the customer, those you serve, and finding out what the crux of the problem is. So we run events like the one we've got coming up in November around neglected tropical diseases, and how we can help connect several billion people with the drugs and the care that they need to wipe out these diseases on the planet. We host workshops. We send students to the field to spend multiple weeks in testing their products, doing primary market research, understanding the customer, finding ways to serve the community. The second thing that I think we do, that we pay attention to, obviously as an academic institution, is education. And we have this saying at MIT, and particularly in the entrepreneurship community at MIT, which is, give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And I should probably switch out him for him and her, because it's far more appropriate. But you know, I think that this statement resonates with, you know, I think it's true, you know, and we've got data that shows that. This is data, the number of businesses that have been started by MIT alumni over time, and we've highlighted students who start businesses 3 years after graduation, 5 years after graduation, 10 years after graduation, and what we're finding is that the majority of successful businesses are founded 5-10 years after graduation, not during school, even though, you know, you may start something. As all entrepreneurs know, most first businesses fail. The second one may be okay, and the third one is the one that ends up scaling. And here, what's important is not the commitment that we've made as entrepreneurship educators to the business. It's about the skills that they're developing. And I think that that is something that we've kind of embedded into our curriculum. It's about the entrepreneur, not the entrepreneurship. So just a few ways that we're doing that at MIT is we're connecting our entrepreneurs with faculty and connecting them with frameworks for how to build strategies for building successful businesses, how to create good jobs, not just jobs that make economic sense, business sense, but also moral and ethical sense. We run classes where we bring and celebrate entrepreneurial role models, something that's inspired me today. And then we connect them with mentors. So the final piece of this is celebration, and I think that this is what today has been all about. And again, we run big events to celebrate our entrepreneurs. We celebrate the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world too much. They're great companies, but what we really need to do is be inclusive about the entrepreneurs that we celebrate, both events but also online. So I've got one more point to kind of end in order to close. I did start writing my letter to Penny, and I won't read the whole thing to you. But I think this might capture some of the points that I've kind of mentioned today. So I start by saying so, and I actually should ask you to come and read it because you're far better at it. But so, my lovely Penny, some advice for you that you may add to your depository of ideas and inspiration for the future. 1, is invest time in discovering and now and again reminding yourself of your purpose. Explore and experiment, expose yourself to the world and get to know the people who live within it, and find something that you care about, something you're passionate about. No matter how big or small, do something that you believe in. Whether it's a question that you want answered, a person that you want to help, a community that you want to serve, this purpose will drive you, make you work harder, and make you stay more focused. It will it will keep you grounded and principled and help you fuel your persistence. Number 2 is commit to a lifelong learning. Invest in your education, your IQ and your EQ, so your human and intellectual capacity, and listen and learn from those around you, just as we've been talking about this afternoon. And to do this, to build not just your skill set, but your value set. The better informed you are, the better your knowledge and experience toolkit, and the better equipped you are to serve your purpose if you invest in your education. And finally, on a more personal note, someone told me recently, when I had a moment of self-doubt, I'm too young to be doing this, I'm too inexperienced, I don't know what I'm doing, I'd had a really tough week and had to make some pretty tough decisions. And she said to me, she said, look what you're doing now and the impact that you're having. But more importantly, look at what you're learning by being a part of this movement. And think about that in the context of what you'll be doing when you're 50 years old. And for me, that was kind of a game-changing piece of advice for someone to give me. So, you know, touch one person's life today, 100 tomorrow, 1,000 over the course of a lifetime. And I think that that's important lesson for us all. So my final piece of advice for my daughter is enjoy the journey and keep smiling. So thank you, everybody.
That's good to hear. Keep smiling. That's what we're going to do. And now we're moving into the final part of our program. And I can see our mayor, Dagur B. Eckerson. He's sitting in the back there. I'm going to call on him to bring this whole session together, and actually the whole day. He will have the closing remarks, but he's also going to tell you a little bit about an idea that we have here at Höfði Reykjavík Peace Center. I'd also like to say it has been such a journey to be part of this project with the city of Reykjavik, and I hope that this day will provide the mayor, just as it has with us here at the university, with the inspiration to continue our work at the Höfði Reykjavík Peace Center. So, Dagur, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for a wonderful and dynamic day. First of all, Madam Vigdís, thank you for letting us have this in your house, Veröld, which means the world. A beautiful house with a very loud door, as we have learned. I also want to congratulate Höfði on the forceful and dynamic speakers that we've been experiencing today. I was here this morning. I couldn't be in the breakout. My breakout was at a different place. But we heard Tawakkol Karman with her strong message that peace has to be founded in justice and fight against oppression. On a maybe more grim or note from one of my favorite organizations in the world, Medicine Sans Frontiers, we had heard only Krishnan Karankara go through the humanitarian work and the challenges it faces And it was, to me, mind-blowing to realize, because what you're saying is true, is that we are getting used to serious breaks of international humanitarian law when it comes to bombing of hospitals and humanitarian aid workers. And what is amazing is that we are very used to the dialogue about how the world has shrunk and now we don't have as many bad things because you can see them on Twitter, but this is happening here and now. I admire your work, and we have to at least start with a discourse of how to change this tide. But today, I mean, it's hard to get through a day of talking about peace without putting into words the feeling that a nuclear war could be started on Twitter in the coming weeks. And it's a fearful thought, but it can happen. And I actually hadn't fully realized this until Sigmar Gabriel came here, because the news had been all about Germany owing to NATO billions of dollars in increased arms. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Baltic states were having a meeting in Reykjavik, and he wanted us to open up Höfði house for him, which was very welcome on our behalf. And he said that I wanted to meet the German press here because through all the discussions of a whole year, we have not spoken about disarmament. Everybody is talking about how the world needs more weapons and more money for war and weapons, and who owes whom what in that field, but not about disarmament. And I thought it was a very strong message, and I even felt that to name a peace center after Höfði really was underlined there, because you have to think, when you're a mayor in Reykjavik and in the small country of Iceland, and you're talking peace, you really at times question, so what on earth can we provide for the discussion and the change we need in the world? But maybe a little house, maybe an inspiration, or a whole room full of people that give ideas, steal ideas, go home, think about it, and give out a strong message at home and wherever they go next. Because I know you guys travel. And that's why you're very welcome. That's why we really cherish listening at what you are saying. And I'm very proud of the small Höfði Peace Center that is thinking big, growing fast, and wants to make its voice heard in the world. And I celebrate that you have got this together and got those people here together. Because I think we're all richer after this day, and I think that we should give them all a big hand. I'm not gonna say all your names, but I think Faten Mahid Al-Hussaini left a very strong memory, and you struck a chord in her heart talking about your own experience. I asked her when walking down, were you born in Oslo? And the reason is very kind of selfish, because I was born as an immigrant in Oslo. My parents from Iceland were studying there, so I was an Icelander born there. But of course, and people laugh, we never think of ourselves within the Nordic countries as immigrants in our own countries, kind of in Scandinavia, within the countries. And Icelanders have a very hard time pressing that forward in the Scandinavia, that somebody should see them or talk about them as immigrants. But that's actually a very strong point and goes back to what meaning we put into borders. Are we just using borders when we are talking about people that really need to come? Or because we are very open to open borders when it's somebody like us that are just coming for a visit or a study or a stay or even a lifetime, if it's somebody from Scandinavia. So I think you have a very challenging question when you asked us, as you asked the Norwegian politicians, am I a Norwegian if I'm wearing the hijab? And that is one of the questions I'm going to take with me, and I think it's important. We all, of course, think we know a lot about Norway and being a young Muslim in Norway because we all watched Scam. But thank you very much for that. As Pia mentioned, we, on the note, maybe close to what Georgian Campbell-Flatter was talking about, look at opportunities in entrepreneurship and young people, and want to do, you could call it an experience or a social entrepreneurship in itself. The Höfði Peace Center is starting an accelerator that we hear more connected to technologies or conventional startups, but it's going to be a peace startup for people with great ideas that can affect the world or local communities or people's heart to further the cause of peace in the world. Yeah. Well, of course we are about to see what happens, but at least I'm excited, and I think it's both a kind of original idea, but an interesting one. And why not? At least this has been a startup with Höfði, but also with all kinds of peace activities. Only the last 3 days, we've received the Peace Boat with a newly granted Nobel how do you say it? Laureate? It's one of these very complex words. For the work of making a contract against nuclear weapons, banning them. And already 122 nations have signed, lacking a lot of nations, Iceland being one of them. And yesterday, Yoko Ono was here, and some of you were with us in Höfði and Viðey, in pouring rain, where the Imagine Peace Tower was lit. And Höfði Peace Center comes into all these projects, and now this forum, and will continue to do so. I will continue to follow what you're doing, and I will support you in any way I or the city can. I'm also very grateful for the cooperation with the University of Iceland, but last but not least, with having all of you here today, exchanging views, changing opinions, minds, and hearts, because that's where we have to start. So thank you for a very interesting, fruitful, and good day. Thank you.
don't have anything else to say. Just thank you as well, Dagur, and to you all. It has been an inspirational day, and I think that a lot of us will be thinking about a lot of things as we go to bed tonight. And hopefully, for the coming years, we will try to contribute what we can, because I think we owe it to the speakers that have been here with us today to try our utmost. Thank you all.